Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Today's episode is brought to you by Element, a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. In other words, no sugar, no artificial coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, and no BS. With Element, I love the watermelon. The watermelon tastes freaking awesome. I drink one pack every day, no matter what. People that train out here, it's sitting out here for them all the time. The boxes don't last very long. Right now, Element is offering Table Talk listeners a free sample pack with any purchase. That's 8 single-serving packages free with any Element order. Get yours at drinkelement.com/Table Talk. The deal is only available through the link in the description. The other thing is, if you don't like it, you can just give it away to a salty friend and Element will give you a 100% refund. No risk, money back guarantee. Head over to drinkelement.com. Elite FTS still has the clearance sales going on right now. I actually wrote them down because yesterday I screwed them all up. So until the end of the year, we have 10% off all strength equipment, 20% off shoulder savers, 30% off bands and apparel. Can't read that one. $100 off the aggressive power bar and $100 off the SS yoke bar plus free shipping, which isn't going to ever happen again. We're not really making anything on that. We're just clearing them because we have too many. That's kind of how that one works. With that, the 40% off straps, wraps, and all power equipment or whatever you want to call that stuff. We call it power gear on the site. Other people will call it supportive gear. Either way, it's 40% off. We have 50% off the garage power rack. All this is at EliteFTS.com. You'll find banners to every one of these on the homepage. If you guys listened to the podcast yesterday that I had with Jim Wendler and Matt Rhodes, there was a part of that podcast where I was talking about, you know, your own accountability and how everything starts with you and ends up back with you. Earlier today, when I was thinking about this and trying to strategize the beginning of 2023, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit on how to strategize, you know, your business and training, right, for a year as it turns through. But the point I was trying to make yesterday is people will look at all these other factors as ways to get around looking at themselves first for the accountability. So you have to have yourself accountable first. The way that I explained it yesterday is, if I'm going to prioritize my life, anything that I do with my family or my business or anything else all starts with me. So if I'm not in order, then I can't take care of my family effectively. And if my family's not in order, then I'm not going to be able to take care of my community effectively. So this is kind of how it all works. You take care of yourself first, you know, kind of like on the airplane, you put the mask on first, you know, before anybody else, because how can you care for other people if you can't care for yourself? Or how can you do it effectively? So you take care of yourself first, and then for me, after that, it's family, then it's community, then it's business. So it all follows suit. I'm not going to look at what's going on in the community and what's going on in the bigger picture as my first priority, because then that's a distraction before what I have to take care of first. Part of taking care of yourself first is making sure that your health is in order. So if you're not sleeping for shit, if your hormones are out of whack, if your dick don't work, all these other factors don't work, then you're not taking care of yourself. One of the best ways that I've found to take care of myself, or part of the mix, is getting my blood work done, getting my lab panels done. This is where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick Health has, you know, self-service options where you can just get your labs done and see what the levels are. You can get the report from that to be able to tell you what's off, what's not off. different suggestions for that. That's at merrickhealth.com/table talk. Or you can have the guided optimization, which I highly suggest, to where you can get together with your care practitioner, determine what labs that you need, and then go about the blood work for that, and then speak to the doctor that can help you with any prescription meds you may need, or nootropics, supplements, whatever, to be able to help get yourself in order. This is also assuming that you're training and that you're working out, which is a big factor of all this, which they will push back on you if you're not. You know, so if that's what you're looking for, merrickhealth.com/table talk. With that in mind, my guest today is Trevor Jaffe. Did I say that right?
You did, yeah.
Because I've heard it a couple different ways.
You said it right. It's like the candy taffy, just with a J.
Yes,
Jaffe.
okay.
And it gets butchered everywhere.
You know, I know. That's why I was going to ask beforehand. And I'm like, fuck, I forgot to ask. You've been in the sport for a long time. You've been around training for a long time. So when I was looking for the notes as far as your bio, I don't want to sit here and say, here's what your lifting history is. You have over a decade of meets. There's close to 30 meets that you've competed in.
50 plus.
50 plus, so they're not even in there.
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, I get that.
That only shows powerlifting.
Okay, yes, yeah. So the powerlifting, this is on open powerlifting. So you started with strongman, but you've deadlifted over 4 times body weight in 181 and 198.
Correct.
You know, over the past 10 years, you've become more known for the coaching of all the all-time world record holders that you've worked with. So I didn't want to get that lost, because that's what I want to talk to you more about, is that than what your own training is and your own accolades are, because people are going to want to know more about how they can help themselves, since I just gave them a whole speech about how they should take care of themselves better.
It's priority number one. It's the first thing we cover whenever we do seminars, whether it's Riley and I or Greg Panora and I. Is the first thing we cover is accountability.
Yeah.
Literally, it's the first thing.
Awesome.
You are absolutely accountable to yourself, and nobody can do it for you. It's not your responsibility for your training partner. It's not your responsibility of your coach. It's not even responsibility of your wife or spouse or husband, whatever you have. They can't do things for you. You have to be willing to do things for yourself, and then you can help others around that. And sometimes the community comes together with people helping each other. But until you're helping yourself, you are not able to help anybody else. You're useless to anybody else.
100%. And I think everybody knows it. They just default to the other.
Always.
You know, it's kind of a powerlifting mentality. Like, I never missed a weight. You know?
No, the platform was crooked. It was the wrong bar. Somebody was using my rack. Yeah. Dude, you weren't fucking strong enough.
Yeah, exactly. Or you didn't do certain things that you were supposed to do. When I was going through your background, and I like I said in the text to you, I'm going to whip through this pretty quick, so just correct me where I
speak fast. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, that works. You know, so you started lifting weights basically very young, so teenager, so 13. Junior high school, and then that kind of led you to finding Powerlifting USA, and then seeing that, and then having a little bit of a mind warp, like you're not as strong as you thought, and a disconnect, you know, because back then everything was geared, suited. You know, so you didn't really, so you didn't get that. Then you went into strongman for about 5 years. And then the Olympic lifting, I wasn't able to make a good connection. When did that happen?
After I destroyed myself in strongman, I destroyed my back entirely. And I was in the hospital Father's Day weekend, about 10 and a half years ago now. And the neurosurgeon was telling me I need spinal fusion surgery and that I'm never going to lift again. And I'm stubborn, and I cursed him out.
Let's backtrack. How did you destroy your back?
It's a great story. 11 days before my first ever strongman contest, I felt a pinch and a pull. There was no tapering effect back then. People didn't talk about deloads, and periodization wasn't really commonplace in strength sports. It was more common in strength and conditioning. And there is a parallel between them now that is well known, but back then it was very hard to scour and get information. There weren't books on periodization in your local bookstore or magazines. It was bodybuilding stuff. The closest you can get to that was Milo, which was talking about different strength athletes and pushing through. There wasn't a lot of talk about programming and strategy, so everything you did was heavy, or you did a heavy light, which is the basis of what Conjugate became for most people as max effort and dynamic. And you know, when you're training without any type of monitoring or coach or programming or group, and you're training on your, everything becomes max effort. So I initially I had my first low back injury 11 days before the comp, did the comp anyways, did the thing that most powerlifters back then did, is you rubbed horse liniment on it to numb the pain, and you take a bunch of anti-inflammatories until I'm crapping blood, basically. So I have to get rid of that aspect. Heals up, come back, and I have the idea that I'm going to compete in a strongman contest 1 week, and a powerlifting contest the next weekend, which was arrogant as hell, and that's what kids do. So at that point, I was running a more true conjugate program. and I was basically doing max effort for the strongman implements on the weekends and dynamic work during the week. Except now that I'm training for 2 different sports, it was all max effort again. So I was max effort squatting midweek.
Full max effort days.
Full max effort until a point where my left leg literally shut down.
Yeah, I can see how that can.
Yeah, I got to a point where the only way I could stop the pain was to load my back with more weight. So when I got into the hospital, the doctor's like, how long have you been dragging or limping on your right leg? Is that he got the MRI results, which he didn't tell me yet. And I'm like, oh, my right leg's fine. I can't feel my left leg. And he's like, well, how long has it been like this? I'm like, 3 weeks. It's gotten progressively worse to a point where I'm not sleeping. I constantly feel like I have to go to the bathroom. TMI for the podcast, but I had chronic erections that had to do with the nerve damage. I didn't want anyone to touch, but there was chronically getting erections and just irritable and couldn't sleep. And my wife at the time threatened me that she was going to leave if I didn't go to the hospital. So Father's Day weekend, that's where I was, in the hospital. And that was a great experience. Not a fun experience, but a great experience because that was first generation like droid phone. And I'm sitting in the hospital and he's telling me I need spinal surgery. And that I was able to Google, because I had my first droid, and I was Googling disc rehab, spinal rehab, corrective exercises for low back pain. And
What year about?
This is 10 and a half years ago, so we're in 2020. It has to be 2012.
Okay, all right.
And I did strongman because I was afraid to put a singlet on because I'm a little shy and introverted, which it doesn't appear now at all to be the case, but I was. And so I didn't have to wear a singlet. I could wear whatever I wanted in strongman, so that's how I got into that first. And I was always enamored by it. But I'm sitting in a hospital and I'm pulling up, and you come up with the Gosku method, and you come up with the McKenzie method, and all of a sudden I get this random weird video on YouTube of Dr. Stu McGill, who at the time nobody knew who he was. And he's talking about spinal stiffness to protect against things and bracing and doing things which coincided with a lot of material I had read from Pavel Tsatsouline at the time, because I was very into strength conditioning. Pavel Tsatsouline has Dr. McGill in his book where he's talking about bulletproof abs. And so I made the correlation. I started reading his material and finding his work. And literally Father's Day, I got out of the hospital. It was on Father's Day. And I get home and I'm on the floor doing dead bugs and bird dogs and the whole nine. And my son, who was 4 at the time, is like, Dad, crawl with me. I couldn't crawl. That was humbling. I could squat several hundred pounds. I could flip a 1,000-pound tire. I could do farmer's walks. I did farmer's picks with 880 pounds without straps. Like, I'm strong. I couldn't crawl. I completely lost basic human function of sitting, standing, kneeling, climbing, crawling, but I can do the events.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, this doesn't work. I need to figure something out. So from that moment, I started to focus a lot more on structural integrity, spinal stability, and that led me to one of my friends who owned a CrossFit gym. It was talking about bringing in a weightlifting coach, and he was putting a post on Facebook about people who wanted to come and learn weightlifting. I'm like, well, I can't do strongman right now because of my back, and I can't really power lift, and weightlifts are lighter, and I need to work on my hip mobility anyways. So I messaged Steve Bowser, who owned CrossFit Fort Lauderdale and the Playground Gym West, because his training partner Mike was his business partner Mike was my training partner. And sure enough, I show up there. I had weightlifting shoes for log clean and press because that gives you the leverage for the overhead log. And the weightlifting coach was extremely pissed off that I was there. He's like, I told you no newbies, nobody who doesn't know how to weightlift. I don't want to teach the basics to beginner. And Steve's like, you don't understand. He's like, this is the strongest guy in the room.
Yeah.
You're going to want him. And so he begrudgingly says, okay. And he starts teaching me how to do a power snatch. And it wasn't pretty, but at that point, I think I power snatched just not even with a hook grip and not even knowing what the hell I was doing, like 225. And he looks at Steve, he's like, who the fuck is this guy? Because at that time, the top snatch in the room for the males was like 230. And I just power snatched 5 below that just on a whim on like my first day. And so I started learning the weightlifts. And the more I learned the weightlifts, it was counterintuitive to every way I was taught to move for powerlifting. Because like you said, I grew up in the generation where it was geared.
Yes.
So everything was low back arch, sitting back, you know, different mechanics than the weightlifting squat, which is high bar, knees forward, narrow stance. And I realized that if I squatted high bar in heels, knees forward, my back didn't hurt. And I never put any pressure on my back. I was upright when I squatted. And I'm like, well, there's more to this. I need to look deeper and deeper and deeper. The internet back then wasn't what it was now. So there was no one teaching raw mechanics for powerlifting. You either learned how to weightlift or you learned how to powerlift. And I'm like, well, why can't I bridge that gap? Why can't I take what I'm learning from weightlifting and apply it to the powerlifting and then also the McGill method of core strengthening? And so that's what I started doing with athletes, of teaching them how to work on spinal stiffness, yet have mobile hips and have mobile shoulders so they can get into the bar and achieve better positions and more lifting efficiency. You know, instead of true diehard low bars hinging back, I started focusing on having them spread their pelvis and sit straight down. And people's numbers started going up. And it got a lot of attention locally throughout Florida because I was showing up to Florida meets with a bunch of CrossFitters who were beating diehard powerlifters who dedicated their life to powerlifting. And I had this soccer mom who's squatting 330 ass to
Yeah.
and you have the, you know, heavyweight, now they have different divisions, but you have like the heavier weight female who's in wraps who's squatting the same thing, looking at this girl like, how?
Yeah.
She's a 132 or a 148, and I'm a 198, and she's squatting what I am. It's like movement efficiency.
Yes.
And that's what people didn't understand at that time. They didn't understand movement efficiency. Everyone was taught to lift the exact same way, which isn't necessarily wrong. One of the clips we shot this morning is just understanding what your leverages are, what your limb length is, what your mechanics are, and not trying to fit the mold of what so-and-so does. Like, my squat will never be your squat. Even if I went to gear, my squat wouldn't be your squat because we have very different builds. You know, I'm around 200 pounds and you were 300 plus pounds. I can't match your mechanics.
Yeah.
Neither should I. But that's what was taught back then. This is how I squat, so this is how you will squat.
Yes. And it's, when you, back then it's weird because, you know, I'm putting out a lot of that stuff, right? So there were, I don't want to use other people's names. There were other styles of squat. I mean, Ricky Crane used to write about form, technique, and style, right? To where there's form, you know, wide, close, you know, stuff like that. Then you have the technique, which is going to be the technique associated with wide or close, and then style, which is going to be whatever unique characteristics you may have. So, for instance, I hate when somebody squats and the bar goes up, comes back down because they're breathing too much into their chest. But if that's somebody's actual style and it doesn't change the bar path,
right,
when they go up or they go down, fine. You know, not a big deal. Not something, because you know, somebody can sit there and say,
are they breaking into extension patterns when they breathe up?
Yes.
Because you can breathe up and still brace without breaking into an extension pattern because you can hold it. Because if you are truly expanding your rib cage as far as possible, it's going to elevate as well as widen as well as depress. It's going to go in 360 degrees. So there are people who still teach that, and they're not wrong, but they're like diaphragmatically breathing. Well, first, all breathing is diaphragmatic.
Yeah.
You can't breathe without it. You're dead. Secondly, like just pushing down is only filling half your cavity. And the more mass you have, the more you can move the bar. So even if you're not a big person, you can create more mass by expanding through breathing.
Yes.
So I understand what people are saying is like, we don't want to see someone breathe up. Chest breathing. Chest breathing is this. And I say that's breathing above the belly. I don't care if your chest rises as long as your belly grows too.
Yes.
Full expansion of your cavity is freaking wonderful.
Yes.
And people get so dogmatic with cues. Belly breathe only. Diaphragm breathe only.
That's
you're a chest breather. It's
yeah.
like, you can't pigeonhole everyone into the same category because I do see people who, and I do it myself, where if I take my breathing to set the brace, my shoulders will elevate because my ribs are expanding.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as shrugging up.
That's the thing.
Yes.
So you know, other people will see it in somebody, then they want to mimic it, then they mimic it by shrugging up.
Sure.
You know, so it's,
the availability bias.
Where I'm going is when I first started putting content out, you're putting out the content of what you're around, what you see, and then the cues you use, right? And those cues.
You taught me how to squat like a powerlifter.
Yeah. So
literally, you taught me how to squat like a
did I
powerlifter.
really?
Came across a little article in some random internet magazine known as T-Nation. Back then it was Testosterone magazine of how to squat 900 pounds. I'm like, well, that sounds like something I should read.
Yeah. So that can be good or bad, right? Because it can be good or bad because you know, when you're using the cues that, and it took me a while. It took me just when I started doing seminars to really figure this out. So when you're using cues that are in the group and the population that you're in, those cues work, right? Because they all mean the same thing to the same people. Now, when you start using those cues to other people, you know, and especially written format, so now different context, they're all fucked up. Yeah. You know, so then you get out and you're like, oh shit, I'm doing seminars. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Well, I'm doing exactly what you said to do. I'm like, I never said this shit. And it says, well, it says right. Like, oh, wait a minute.
You said this in 1999.
Yeah.
It's not what you said in 2009.
I'm like, that's
not what you said
not
in 19.
really what I'm, you know, it took, I think with that, it took years, you know, many years for people to start taking that and seeing that this can be cued a different way, right? Because I've always say at the end of the day, most people are all saying the same things.
Yes.
You know, it's just different. And it had to, you know, grow over a period of time. And that when I started doing seminars, I mean, there's hundreds of people that I've worked with. It's like, oh fuck, you know, it's like what I'm saying here was like a big mind fuck, right? And then you start dealing with people that aren't going to use gear, and they're like, well, I'm supposed to like sit way back. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
You know, you're not. So, you know, and it's
if you have a very large frame, and very mobile hips, sure, you can get away with it. But it's now the minority, not the majority of the raw squat. Most raw squats are medium stance, knee travels forward. There's very few people who are squatting with a vertical shin and sitting back. And I think people adapted that from great strength athletes in the past. So if you look at great photos of Paul Anderson in the 50s squatting. Now, Paul Anderson was 400 pounds. And was quite athletic. He could jump off stage and land in a handstand, which is incredible for a 400-pound person. But his squat was vertical shin, sitting between his legs and sitting back between his legs, and his power belly was
a little wider though too.
Yes.
You bring it in like
so
Goggins.
People look at this like, this is the strongest squatter in the world. This is how he squats. Let's all mimic this pattern. And that's what happens. It's a game of telephone. Like, this is how he squatted. This is how I squat. This is how you'll squat. And it's like, but that's not how I should squat. And you learn that through injury, unfortunately, or realizing that you can find a more efficient way. Because really, yes, it's a strength sport. But you can't express that strength as well as you want to unless you have movement efficiency. And that's what people are just starting to grasp now. It's not just how strong you are. It's how efficient you are and technically sound you are in the movements, which is where a lot of the specificity comes from now.
When you were coming up through, so you got the Olympic weightlifting and it kind of merges into the powerlifting, but from your education side of learning the process and learning these things, you go from, what you find in internet articles and magazines and stuff like that, then that will lead you to, if people follow the same path, I'm assuming that you kind of follow the same path, just to bump us work, it's going to lead you to some block periodization work. And then you start to find that this is track and field. And then you got in your mind, there's some Olympic weightlifting, most of it's kind of track and field when you're dealing with
sport. Field and course athletes.
And so now you got to wrap your head around, how does this relate to powerlifting, right? Which is not that complicated, guys, just saying, right? Because, you're dealing with two very simple lifts, right? Or three very simple lifts where, if you're a football player, you got so many different motor abilities and so different things you got to balance in there.
And you have to put the right exercises for each skill position.
Exactly.
A running back is not going to do what a receiver does, and a receiver is not going to do what the quarterback does, and vice versa.
So as you're going through and you're putting all this together, what were some of the resources that stuck out when you were going through those?
So the very first book that explained powerlifting program to me was Fred Hatfield's Bodybuilding: A Scientific Approach. This is back when he was the advisor for the WBF when Vince McMahon tried to start a bodybuilding federation.
Was that before or after Power? Because he wrote one that was called
Powerlifting: A Scientific Powerlifting: A Scientific Approach is 1978, 79.
I think that was after this. I think the science.
This is in the late 80s.
Right?
And he's going through and he's talking about inverted volume and compensatory acceleration training and percentages and power punch chart, and none of it makes any sense to me. I'm reading this book. I'm 16 years old. And I'm coming from bodybuilding magazines where it's lats, traps, pecs, bro splits. You have your push-pull split and whatever. There was no saying as high-frequency training. You either trained it once a week with an incredible amount of volume until you went limping out of the gym, or you trained it twice a week and you had half the volume but it equal throughout the whole week kind of thing.
Programming. Out of curiosity, I have to ask because I went through these same sources, right?
Nice.
At the same age, too. So there's nothing else. There's magazines and there's that. How did you interpret the compensatory acceleration?
Move fast. But that was all I can gather from it. I didn't understand moving lightweights fast. It was just an intention of, okay, try and move as fast as you can through the concentric phase. So basically, to simplify that for most people, if you're coming out of the hole of a squat, jump. And it doesn't matter if you have your 50% load.
But is that how you
load.
interpreted it then?
No, at 16, it didn't mean a damn thing to me. It made no sense until later in life.
What made it click?
Okay, so I tried to read that book at 16, didn't get didn't far through there. You mentioned Tudor Bampa. I read his book, Serious Strength Training, which is one of the first books that had EMG studies and showed, but well before its time. We're talking about a book that came out in the 80s still, maybe early 90s, that showed stretch-mediated hypertrophy, which no one was talking about back then, but now everybody was talking about stretch-mediated hypertrophy.
Because it's new.
Yes, even though it's 30 fucking years old. Can I be new again too? I'd appreciate that. So I was devouring bodybuilding magazines, strength magazines. We talked earlier off camera about seeing bodybuilders in gyms that were writing articles that weren't actually doing those things because they were in the gyms and they never touched them. So I was always like scouring for more information. In my 20s, I started reading, not in my 20s, but in my teens, I started reading your articles and talking about West Side and the Conjugate Method and dynamic effort. Okay, dynamic effort made sense, working on rate of force production. I understood from a strength and conditioning background the stretch shortening cycle, that the faster you train that stretch shortening cycle, the more power you're going to generate, more motor units you can activate. That made sense to me. It didn't make sense to me to use lighter loads, though, with accommodating resistance until much more recently. I actually understood what that was. That was technique work. Because you didn't do technique work in your gear, you did a technique work raw you use the same form, but you did it raw against lighter loads, so you can work on the force generation, the power, and then you did your maximal work, which was overloading positions or forms or patterns or actual overloads with like reverse bands. But back then it didn't make sense to me. Later on, as I got into strongman training, it started to make a lot more sense that the heavier I trained my strongman events, the worse I got at them. It was doing nothing but breaking me down. So I revisited Hatfield's work at that time, and he was going over compensatory acceleration training again. And it started to make a lot more sense that I'm getting more technique work and skill practice by having more first reps, by using sub-maximal loads, but putting 100% maximal force into those loads. So if your example is, so people who are newer don't understand, if you can squat 500 pounds, you don't go in the gym and squat 500 pounds every time. You're probably not going to get anywhere. Eventually, there's a revision to the mean or a reversal that happens from overtraining. But if you can squat 400 pounds with 500 pounds of force, then you can keep building upon that, because then you can do, let's say, 5 sets of 3 with the 405 at 500 pounds of force. And that's like training 500 pounds for 15 reps as opposed to just 1 rep.
Yeah.
So you're getting much more high benefit and value carryover skill work. And you're going to be able to challenge your technique enough that it's above 80% and it's heavy enough that you can move through, but you can still move through it fast. And with the inverted volumes, you didn't fatigue. For example, I'm very much a speed guy. I am very dynamic on my deadlifts. I'm very dynamic on my squats. My bench is just never going to work for me. But if I were to do 3 sets of 5, I'm going to be wiped out after that first set. I'm done. But if I did 5 sets of 3, I can make it all the way through that, and every one of them is going to be fast. So I'm getting much more effective reps in that aspect, because I'm stopping a little bit shy of true failure and grinding, and then I can then carry over. For example, the last meet I did, I really jumped into it very late and prepped. The heaviest squat I took in prep, I was like, let me just see if I can do my opener. I'll jump in this meet. My opener was like 578. I squatted 572 in the gym. I opened at 578, jumped to 606, and then 628, I think it was my third. My third moved really fast, even though it's 50 pounds more than I took in the gym. Because I put 600 plus pounds of force into that 572 when I took it in the gym. That's all I need to know if I can move it fast. I didn't need to know. There's a lot of people like, I need to hit it in the gym before I hit in the meet. No, if you hit it in the gym, you're significantly less likely to hit it in the meet, because you've gotten to your highest threshold of fatigue. And that's what people don't necessarily understand about max effort now with the raw lifts, because there's no supportive gear. In your day, it was a little bit different. You guys were doing some of your max effort lifts like raw or semi-raw, or maybe just in briefs or straps down. Nowadays, the raw lifter who looks at the conjugate method and they try to match that are doing full specificity, absolute maxes, and they're wondering why it's not working for them. Well, they're breaking themselves down. They're fatigued. They haven't learned how to manage that system very well. The problem's not the system. It's the way they're applying it.
Yeah, when I was doing all that, we didn't use gear at all. So it was only in the meet. So all the max effort stuff, I got a follow-up question with this. All the max effort stuff was, singles, triples, pretty much always singles, but always raw. The only time, a belt, but only a belt towards the higher sets. The dynamic work might have been single, probably briefs or something like that. But, on that spectrum of being, fast, fast and strong, right? So speed, I fell on the speed side, 100%, more on that side than the strong side. Where for me, if I didn't do speed work, however you want to classify that, work that allowed me to use compensatory acceleration, let's put it that way. The weight gets too heavy, I don't have that. Weight's too light, I don't have it either, because it's moving too light. The max effort work, to this day, I still question if it did fucking anything for me. The heavy singles. Now the sub-maximal. Do you feel the same way 100%. With the way that you work?
I get so much more building out of sub-maximal loads than I do actual maximal loads. Maximal loads tend to break me down faster than sub-maximal loads, but I can still put 100% force into those sub-maximal loads. Now when people hear sub-max and they think of conjugate, they start hearing 55, 60, 60%, 65%, but that's with the accommodating resistance. And then if people actually came to West Side, like I've done seminars with Justin Tooley, Greg Panora, Laura Stackhouse, Chris Mason was at one of my seminars. They were using more band tension. They were really forcing that acceleration, even though the load was light, because it was about rate of force development and stuff like that. So people don't understand that. And for raw, that doesn't work as well. Because if you're doing it in multiply or in single ply, and you're hitting the bottom in a suit, it's taking off that bottom effect. But if you're doing it in raw and you're using significant band tension, it's not the same, because now you've underloaded entirely the bottom position. I have seen that where people will post videos of them squatting 600 pounds at the top and 300 at the bottom, but they can't squat 500 in competition because they never trained more than 300 or 330 at the bottom. But so they couldn't control and stabilize 500 at the bottom, but their top was astronomical. Well, the competition's not a top end; it's a bottom end.
So they were using bands on max effort work.
No, this was just general training work.
General training.
People will make up a reason to do something that sounds cool.
Yeah,
in today's world.
No, it's I've been at, I've had these people out that were at Westside after I was there.
Right.
Just trying to fill in gaps, between where it was when I left to where it became, and because we used bands, but it was not to the degree that
super maximals when they really came in heavy.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of that Circa Max phase.
Yeah.
That went through there. Hated it. Hated it. But that was maybe only the last 3 years that I was there. But as you were speaking, I'm kind of processing what you're saying. I'm like, wait a minute, they're using this shit on max effort work, and I'm processing all this stuff. I'm like, is that why they are getting more carryover out of their gear than what we got? Because we didn't get shit out of it. We didn't get very much. Like, I'm not gonna say we didn't get anything.
The gear's also gotten better.
Well, the gears. Well, I had a canvas suit, but I didn't put it on until the meet. But it's. But if you, my bitch, not bitch, but a lot of the guys that I trained with, when we look back, the specificity. This is how we would explain it. The specificity for us was not there.
No.
For the gear, that if we would have learned it better, we would have got way more out of it, right? So, but then I digress and I look at it and I'm like, okay. Then what would we have done if it was just raw and we had the option for raw? Like, what would that could carry over, from the peak, from when we peaked for whatever the meet was. So then you had that super compensation because we trained all raw. Sure. The only time the shit came on was there. So then it's like, no, wait, it's always a mystery. Like, what would it have been if it was, say a 940 and I don't get shit on my squat? Would that have been like an 850 and 800, and could it have been like a 12, 11, you don't really know.
Yeah. Its strength is a skill.
Yeah.
And multiply, your single ply is much more technical than raw. You have margin of error in raw. You don't have it in gear. That's what people don't understand, and people will trash it. And I appreciate it for what it is. It's a different sport with the same lifts.
It is. It certainly is.
And now they know to train the gear, which unfortunately makes them very weak raw. I mean, I've seen people who were benching 500 in gear who can't bench 350 in raw.
That's where I was going. Like, did they, I wonder, have they gotten so far away?
Yeah.
From that.
But that's a different sport. They should.
I know. I don't know the answer. You see what I'm saying? Like, if I aired on that low end, right, and then they're airing on that high end, then I don't know the answer. It's just a curiosity conversation, like where, because it shouldn't be. I don't think that gap should be that big. Because for some, it's huge,
yes,
with that carryover. It's really big.
That's because they specialize in the one. They specialize in multiply only. I know you had Amber on here recently, and she trains all three disciplines, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I don't know if she does single ply. I know she does multiply. I know she does like the unlimited band bench shirts and raw, but she's strong in all three, and that's because she trains all three.
Yeah.
If that holds her back from being the best at any of them, I don't know. That's for her to decide. But if she specializes in one or the other, she'd probably be better because at this point, a specialist is going to exceed a generalist. When you're growing up in your youth, a generalist is going to actually overtake the specialist over time because you have multifaceted approach in your growth and your development. You'll learn skill faster because you have more tools. But at the advanced stage, and then it's to become the specialist. So if you're training specialty in multiply, you're going to be great at multiply. If you're training specialty in raw, you're going to be great at raw. There are people who toggle back and forth in between, and people who feel like they get a benefit because they get some overload on their back. I remember talking to Daniel Tinajero about this many years ago. I was talking about because he was transitioning from multiply to raw and back and forth. They were doing one of each a year. And I was like, well, what's the difference in feel between your multiply and raw? He goes, raw feels easy after multiply. He goes, when you've had 1,000 pounds in your back and all of a sudden you have 700 pounds in your back, it doesn't feel like anything. He's like, so you don't get nervous, you don't get rattled at all. He goes, you could just go through it and not think about anything. He goes, when I'm in gear, he's like, I got 1,000 thoughts.
Oh yeah, I mean, one thing goes bad, but there's also that spinal compression at a higher level.
It's a pain tolerant sport.
Where if it's all year, I wonder what the longevity. This is going to piss all the multi people off.
They want it to be safer, but it's not.
It's not. If it's all year, it's not because of what you're talking about. It's the pain tolerance level and all that. But they don't need to train in their gear all year anyhow. No. By doing what you're saying, what Daniel does, it takes it off. Yes, it's still 700 pounds, which is a lot.
And that's why he has the longevity he has in multiply or in powerlifting in general. I think he's been competing since he's 14. I want to say he's 30 something now.
Yeah.
But that's what gives him the longevity and the health he's had is being able to plug in those holes when he's not in the gear.
Yeah. So going back to the block and the Fred Hatfield and the scientific approach and all that, at what point did you start to get more into some of Bompa's work, Ursulin's work, the higher level block work?
I transitioned from Hatfield to Asheron's block periodization.
Okay.
And that makes a tremendous amount of sense. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nobody who can dispute or argue it. Nobody says it's a terrible system. Everyone just says it's a long, boring, drawn-out system. And it is, because you go through accumulation, transmutation, and realization, or as we bastardize it, hypertrophy, strength, peaking.
It's the same shit.
The difference is our sport is our practice as well. And when you're dealing with a strength and conditioning athlete, their practice is not their sport per se. They're doing strength and conditioning to get better at their sport. We are doing strength and conditioning to get better at our sport in a different manner than they are, because we're actually doing the competition lifts to get better at the competition lifts. They're squatting and deadlifting or benching, which they probably shouldn't be benching with a straight bar at that point, but they're doing these strengthening movements to just get stronger on the field in sport. Here's the difference, and here's where it really shifted my mindset, is we don't have seasons. There was a time in your day, no offense, but there was a time in your day where you knew the same 2 meets you were going to do every year at the same time. The sport's no longer like that.
That sucks.
Especially when you coach now, you have people like, can I be ready for this local meet in 7 weeks? Yes. I want to do this meet, it's in 15 weeks, can I be ready? Yes. We don't have seasons anymore. There's no longer an off season for powerlifting anymore, because competitions happen every week now. They're not sporadic. It's not 20 people anymore. Now it's 180 people, 200 people. They're big meets, they're small meets, but there's a local meet somewhere every month. And in Florida, you can get a meet every other weekend if you wanted to, between 5 different federations.
Well, even at the higher level, the big meets never fall around the same time.
So it no longer made sense to put somebody into a 6-week block of hypertrophy, a 6-week block of strength, and then a 6-week block of peaking, because I didn't know when they're going to be 12 to 15 weeks out. They might only be 7 or 8. And when you coach, I have to have them ready regardless, and even if I feel like that was the best system for them. As I was reading a lot of Asheron's work and Bondarchuk's work of transfer of sport, which is specificity work, I also revisited a lot of Poliquin's work. Poliquin kind of lost a lot of his luster because he went off the end of just shilling and selling every supplement known to man.
Well, and bodybuilding is really hard.
But his strength work was astronomical. And he started to notice that high-level athletes adapt within 2 weeks. And I was like, that's mind-blowing. 2 weeks. I'm like, every time I get back from a meet and I go into hypertrophy phase, the first 2 weeks suck, and then I'm adapted to hypertrophy again, and my endurance is back, and I can be fine. But if I go 6 weeks, I lose my strength. So when I get to the strength phase, it's the same thing. It's the same 2 weeks again, and I've lost it again. I've lost the endurance, but now I have the strength. And then after that, I'm in the peaking phase, and now I've lost my endurance completely because I'm in a peaking phase. So I have no work capacity whatsoever, but I'm strong, and I'm peaking, and I can lift high weights. But these are periods of like 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. And so I'm reading Poliquin talking about 2-week adaptations, and I'm like, what if I just shorten each block to 2 weeks? So now the accelerated block program that I use with the majority of my athletes, which is what I use with Jenn Rotsinger, it's what I use with Stacy, she came from Conjugate, and I can vary these week lengths as long as I want, but it's going to be 2 weeks of hypertrophy, 2 weeks of strength, 1 week peaking, deload. Or it might be, if they're coming off of a meet, it might be 3 weeks of hypertrophy, 2 weeks of strength, deload, however I want it. But I could adjust it so I can have them ready within 7 weeks if I need to, or 6 weeks if I need to for a meet, because they're always cycling through that, which is why hashtag stay ready, because it only takes 2 weeks for that adaptation. And because their sport is their skill, that's what they're training. They're training the same sport they need. They're training the same skill. I just changed the movement. So if it's technically what you want to call off season, they're probably doing an SSB, a cambered bar, or a high bar, not necessarily a little bar, because I don't want to beat up the shoulders. I'll bring that in as we get closer to peak. But it could even be 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 week, or 1 week. I can change the weeks as I go. It allows me to cycle through. And within that parameter, I can also cycle in undulation for different lifts. For example, when I worked with Chris Bridgeford, he was a 900-pound deadlifter, both stances, with straps, but 900 pounds, both stances. His deadlift was the most fatiguing for him. So we put him on a higher frequency of squat and a higher frequency of bench. Those are the lifts that needed to come up. And those were put in a linear model of basically a heavy day, a volume day, and a lighter technique day before his deadlifts. And then his deadlifts were undulated, where it was heavy 1 week, speed the next, heavy 1 week, speed the next. You can call it dynamic, but all raw lifts are dynamic. But lighter and load that he could just focus on technique. And that worked tremendously well for me. He ended up pulling, he just narrowly missed 881 in comp. He fell over at the top of that one, but he had his best meet. But it allows me to cycle in any periodization, because you and I have talked about, they all overlap. I can cycle any of them into that and still use that format of time. For a different example, Phil Herndon, when he broke his record, we were using straight conjugate. It was just heavy, light, heavy, light, heavy, light. We would alternate. So the weeks he deadlifted heavy were the weeks he squatted light. The weeks he squatted heavy, he deadlifted light, and so forth. That was very traditional. But it allows me to fluctuate in that. So everyone who's training who's not at that level and needs to have size put on their body, or they need to have strength put on their body, or peak
Yeah.
in a short amount of time, can. So peaks are usually kept to 1 week in regular blocks, unless they're in an actual peaking phase for a meet, then it's a 3-week peak. But it allows me to fluctuate because everyone seems to adapt within 1 to 3 weeks. And as you're learning that lifter, the smaller, lighter lifters maybe can go a little longer. Like I work with Pyle Ghosh. She's the all-time world record holder. USAPL, I think she pulled 387, 384, I don't remember, at like 97 and 104. She owns it for both divisions. She can go 7 weeks before she deloads. She actually begs me to hold off for like an 8th week before she deloads.
Yeah.
But then I had someone like Corey Clark who has years of wear and tear and competed in strongman, competed in powerlifting, and is massive. He's like 235 pounds and just lean. He's a sub 10% body fat, that lean. He breaks down much more quickly. It's 3-week waves, and then he's got to deload. Jordan Wong, usually we would do, he's all-time world record for squat. We usually do 3-week waves and a deload. If we're a little bit further out, I might stretch out to 4. And then as it gets closer to the meet, it's going to be like 3 up, 1 down, 3 up, 1 down because of his recovery in different aspects. But you can tailor it to that person. So if I only have a 3-week wave with someone and it's off season, it's probably going to be 2 weeks of hypertrophy, 1 week of strength, the deload. Coming back, it'll be 2 weeks of strength, 1 week peak, deload. I could cycle up and down as fast or as slow as I want with each athlete. And they get all 3 components of the accumulation, the transmutation, and the actualization. That way they're touching every block, they're touching heavy weights. Because when we don't touch heavy weights, we lose them. But do we need to touch them weekly? Probably not. Because the stronger you get and the better you get at recruiting motor units, the faster you'll fatigue doing that.
All right, with a couple things with the deload, how do you define the deload? I know it's going to be different for each person, but what is that?
This is something that's a hot topic right now. People will think of deloads as just a volume deload. So maybe you still go in there and do something heavy. And other people are like, oh, load deload. If it's a true deload, I prefer it to be both. I like to reduce volume by 25%, and I like to reduce load by 15 to 20% as well. I want them to have tapered back. I always tell them on a deload, nothing should be above RPE 6.
Does the exercise change?
If I'm pivoting them to new blocks, yes. If I'm not, and most people know, I just bring them down. There are some things I will modify though. So if they've been doing banded work the whole block for like squats, I'll pull the bands off because the bands are going to overspeed the eccentrics, are going to cause more fatigue. I'll pull away the accommodating resistance on the deload so they're not causing fatigue.
Yeah. Now you've been training people for a long ass time.
Since
right?
2001.
For a very long time, right? So before you came up with the implementation of this model, did you try to put in to make sure we're speaking the same language, transition blocks, which would be take one of the skill acts, say you go back to the regular blocks, right? Here they are. And then you'll have like a bridge, and that bridge will transition this block to this block on whatever ability they would typically lose, right? So say if that ability is going to be strength, speed, just a little bit, it's going to be maintained in that hook, right, to be able to push through. Basically, it just kind of allows that motor ability to move more in there. It's a pain. If you don't have people for long term, it's a pain in the ass.
It's hard to do that.
Yes.
And it's also hard to do that because a lot of these people aren't athletes.
No, I'm speaking for you though, because you have control over yourself.
Yes, I do.
We can experiment with ourselves much better.
Yes. I usually will. I'll run things out myself first or ask friends like, hey, I'm going to be running this. Do you want to try it? And different things. And usually I will. My biggest decline is work capacity. Yeah. And the thing that builds my lifts the least is work capacity. But after every meet, I will go back to work capacity work. I'll take an entire week off of a barbell. I'll do high rep dumbbell work, high rep bodyweight stuff, high rep lunges to start working on muscular endurance. Because I do find that even though it doesn't build my strength, it does build your capacity is the right word. It builds your capacity to handle heavier loads later because you're in better physical shape. Yeah. And people forget that we have a 9-rep sport and you only do 1 rep at a time. But if you're in poor physical shape, it's really hard to express that strength very well.
Yeah, for me, if that falls, the work capacity defined the same way, my focus falls.
Yes.
So if it's a triple, it's way harder for me to actually think on that 3rd rep of the corrections that I need to do. Yeah. That 3rd rep just becomes just like a grind muscle fuck lip.
And I'm the type that I don't want to think at all.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing this correctly and I've programmed myself correctly and trained, we went over one of these clips we were filming in the beginning of becoming autonomous with certain lifts. If you're having to think about anything during the lift, you haven't trained it very well leading up to the meet.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that until it
because
stalls.
You're shutting your computer down if you're thinking about more things. It's great that our brain can think about 10,000 things at once, but I only want it to think about one thing, and that's standing back up.
Yeah. That's always been the case for me until it stalls.
But to answer your question, if I feel like I've lost the capacity, I'll use it in the warm-ups. So I don't need to plug in dynamic days specifically if I feel like I've lost my speed. I'll use bands in my warm-ups and take them off for my work sets. So I've ingrained that pattern of having to accelerate through my warm-ups because that does happen. I feel like I'm lifting slower and not moving as fast. I can use bands on there, or bands. I put a lot of videos up for R&T, reactive neuromuscular training for band work, to learn how to engage your lats or learn how to externally rotate your ankles and your feet and your hips for sumo deadlifts and stuff like that. Sometimes those little priming tools can help ingrain that pattern for you if you feel like you've lost it. But they don't have to be the working sets. They can just be the warm-ups. So you're priming the skill, and then you're building and testing the skill with your actual working weight.
Okay. Then once we get back to this, moving through, how long ago did let's just say a philosophy of training, right? That I don't want to pigeonhole anybody into that, because anybody that's been around for a long time knows 5 years from now it should always be evolving. It's going to be different, right? So, but you still have a philosophy, a base, right? That's based upon things that are true with any training program, principles, and so forth. How long did it take for you to really get that?
That's a great question. It always evolves. It always changes. Recent research will change your thought process or ideology, and things you've tested on yourself will change it. And sometimes you'll look at research and it's like, that's wrong.
But the base does.
The base doesn't change. Yeah, you're going to have principles over systems. And that's what people struggle with, is understanding to have principles of strength. And so there are certain principles that load is our main driver of the neurological adaptation for strength. So we want to make sure we keep some load in there. Strength is a skill, so we want to make sure that our motor patterns are mechanically similar for the movements. If we're not doing a competition squat, we want to make sure that the motor pattern is trained instant. You don't want to step away and just do leg press, hack squats, and leg extension and think that your squat's going to grow. Yes, your quads will, but is it transferable? No, because it's not specific. So you leave a squat pattern in there. Those principles maintain the same. I'm very much a volume guy, especially for, and some people will say I'm a low volume guy, but other people are like, holy shit, I have to do all that. I'm very much a volume person because volume builds, but there's a point where it's too much volume. We can't keep adding volumes. Then we add different variables and different stimulus, different changes. So, that's when you start adding in wide grip, narrow grip, medium grip. In the very beginning stages, people just need to have load and volume and frequency to build a skill, build muscle, and go through, because the amount of muscle you have is your potential for future strength, even though it's still mostly, a neurological effect. But there was a recent study that shows like correlation of muscle size and strength. So the bigger the powerlifter, chances are they're the stronger powerlifter. So we want to add some muscle. But those principles don't really change, and it's some level of specificity. So it's going to be load, frequency, some level of specificity, and volume over time to practice that skill or build muscle. Those don't ever change. How I structure them might change, and who I choose what for might change. And for a while, I was very much a percentage-based guy. And I still prefer percentages for most people, because 90% of lifters will overshoot their RPE, or if you're like me, I'll overshoot my deadlift RPE and undershoot my squat RPE.
Yeah. I mean,
we all have a lift.
None of them are perfect.
None of them are perfect. So what I'll usually do now is a blended approach, where that first set will be an RPE based. And something I've adapted to now in using somewhat is I would do the volume in percentage base, or I'll do the volume based off that top set. So before it might be an RPE set of 5. I'm sorry, an RPE, 1 times 5 at RPE 8, and then I might have them do 3 by 5 at 70%, because ideally it's going to be a drop down for them because of their RPE 5. But I was finding that some lifters who weren't feeling well were actually using less on their RPE set of 5 because they didn't auto-regulate, or didn't, if you convince yourself something's heavy, you're going to use less. But even though they used less on what's supposed to be their top set, they still did the volume. So there are some lifters who psychologically just need percentage work, and for them, I'll give them ranges.
Well, when you say percentage of their top weight, so say that top weight is a set of 5.
Right.
Are they converting that top weight to a single to come up with a percent?
No, whatever their max is. But if the top set is RPE based, it's subjective on how they feel.
Yeah.
And some people will tell you, here's my top set of 5, and it was an RPE, 8, and you're looking at it as like, it looks like a 6, but it's subjective on how they feel.
Yeah.
And there are other people who posted up like, that was a fucking 10.
Yeah.
But everybody was able to do the back off work, no problem. I'm like, so for some people, auto-regulation doesn't work.
No,
or
so
they don't know how.
The back off work's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So say they work up and they do 400 for 5.
Right.
So the back off set, is that 70% of that 400?
Other actual max. Now I do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I use both. So if someone auto-regulates well,
yeah,
I'll give them the back off work off the top set.
Got it.
If they don't regulate well, I'll give them back off work at volume.
So if it's off that top set, do you, I call it Bulgarian. The Bulgarian approach would be, take X minus, take that minus X kilos, or are you just going a percentage of what that is?
most often I'll use a percentage of what their actual max is for them to get appropriate volume. I still like to use Paralympics chart. I just use the lower end numbers because for people who don't know, Paralympics chart was used off weightlifters in the Olympic weightlifting cycle for every 4 years. And he realized that the Bulgarians were phased out in 3.5 years, but didn't matter because it was a government sponsored system. They just put the next person in. And the Russians were lasting about 12.5 to 13 years. So they were going through 3 Olympic cycles with the same athlete. They're getting much more out of it. And the Russians were using submax weight between 70 and 82.5% for the majority of their volume. And the Bulgarians were using 90% plus every single day. A blended approach between the two is probably best because it's unlikely that I'm going to have an athlete for 3 Olympic cycles. I have yet to have an athlete last for 12 years. I have some that are 6 years, but I've not had an athlete that's going to last 12 years. Not very likely. And nor would I be able to program them that long because of the way powerlifting's structured now. But if I give them that blended approach where they're still touching some top end weights that are above 80% at times, and then doing volume and the lower end percentages of Paralympics chart, they're going to have enough stimulus for growth. They're going to have enough stimulus for skill practice, and they're going to have enough neurological stimulus to get stronger.
Yeah.
So I keep all the work in that range. And then something that you questioned this, I wanted to go back to, but the weightlifting changed my perspective because when you ran the West Side style conjugate, it was one main barbell lift basically, and then all the accessories were bodybuilding accessories. Weightlifters tend to do 80% of their work with the barbell.
Yeah.
Weightlifters are much better with the barbell than most powerlifters, which is how I was getting the CrossFitters through because they were doing almost all their work with the barbell, and then their calisthenics were their accessory work. So I'm a big proponent on barbell volume. So I'll structure a main lift, a secondary lift that's targeting a weak area, and then there might even be a third lift that's also barbell based. So they're getting more practice. And I have a lifter, Gabriel, who's working with me. He's like, wow, I've never done this much barbell volume. I'm like, what sport do you compete in? He's like, powerlifting. I go, what do you expect to do? He goes, lift the barbell. I go, exactly. Like, that's the game changer for weightlifting versus powerlifting is they were doing one exercise with the barbell, and then 80% of their work was all accessory and bodybuilding stuff. Well, you're not a bodybuilder, you're a powerlifter.
Yeah.
So I put in more barbell volume, which shocks people at first. That's why, on paper, when I started working with Stacy, she ran a traditional conjugate. She did one barbell movement and like 8 to 10 accessories. Her workouts were 4 hours long. And she mentioned somebody who was like her advisor, which is like her coach. But I gave her her first week, and there was only 5 exercises each day. And she's like, that's all you want me to do? I'm like, get through it and then talk to me.
Yeah.
And 3 weeks later, she's texting me. She's like, I've never failed lifts in my life. I don't know about this. Now, granted, I targeted all her fucking weaknesses right out the bat. Like, she had a low back like a mule, but she had no quads, she had no core, she had no mobility, and that was our priority. And she's like, on the plus side, my workouts take half the time. She's like, on the other side, she's like, I'm fucking dying. I'm like, because you didn't get good at your sport. You just got strong.
Well, 5 can be a lot, so there's another thing too.
It would be like high bar squat.
No, I get it.
Pause squat.
I'm just laughing because
Bulgarian split squat. It would be a hinge movement, so it would be like RDL and then core, like real rollouts, that kind of shit. So it's 5 total exercises, but not 5 barbell movements. I don't want to confuse anyone.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they're going to think that's
so
not a lot.
on paper, she told me it wasn't enough, and then going through the workout, she's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, good. What are we going to get good at? Lifting a barbell. And that's the thing that people lose as far as specificity. It doesn't have to be the competition lifts. It's the specificity. You don't practice football without a football. You can shadow box, but it's not the same as sparring or hitting mitts. It's just conditioning work or skill work or foot movement patterns, and that will get you better at those things, but it's not necessarily get you better at boxing. There's not a single boxer in the world who prepares for a fight with shadow boxing only. They fucking hit things. So if you're going to be a powerlifter, you have to move the bar and get really good at moving the bar in multiple ways and get comfortable with the bar. That is the primary driver of your sport.
Now, that's actually one of the things that I think you guys have done better than the people that have come before.
Sure.
Is we would say things like everything you do in the gym has to have a purpose and a reason. And if you can't tell me what that is, don't do it. But see, that's very general. You see, this goes back to what I was talking about before when, I'm putting content out and you're making assumptions that they know what the fuck you're talking about. Where now you guys are able to be able to take that broad statement.
It's so great that you view me as like the new school and everybody else views me as the old school.
It's fucked up, right? But
I've just adapted to each one. So I'm like middle school.
It is. Yeah. Well, it's cool to see because I think that, every generation per se should find what worked and didn't work in the generation above, the same way that I did with those, and try to make as best corrections as you can, communicate it to the people that you're going to be able to help. But see, the other thing that's changed over the years is the communication means has changed.
Astronomically. I used to have to go so far and wide to find material to read and books. And you mentioned Powerlifting USA when I was trying to learn about powerlifting. I was 16 and I drove to some like bodega bookstore in Hialeah. And that was the only place I could find Powerlifting USA. There wasn't websites that talked about powerlifting like this, or forums still came years after that. The internet was just starting; it didn't exist. There was no Reddit.
Yeah,
there was no YouTube. Yeah, there wasn't sources. I mean, I could pick up my phone and find 15 different sources now.
Yeah.
Then I would have to mail order back of catalogs and never know if it was actually going to show up or find things. Or, I did what you guys did. I went to someone's garage who was experienced, and I learned from them, and I followed their rules and went into their house. I was welcome to their house and was part of their community. That was what I was doing when I was in Strongman. When I wanted to take it seriously, I started training with Heath Allison, who was a pro strongman, in his garage next to gas cans and fuels, inhaling those things for 4 hours every Saturday. And that was how I learned. And I appreciate that. So my lesson and my objective is to keep passing information down.
Yeah, and it's so intriguing to me, because when I'm going way, and I'm going to date myself now, right? So I'm going back to doing seminars in people's garages and shit in like 99, like 98, like way the fuck back. And to validate what you just said, I could go to different regions. Like if I went to California, I called it like, I'd come back and, in the, say 2004, when Wendler was doing it too, I'd come back and he's like, well, did you see the California squat? I'm like, yep, it was the California squat. Did you see the Texas squat? Yep, it was the Texas squat. Did you see the New York squat? Yep, it was. And
regional.
Yeah, so we
regional
would joke,
mechanics.
We joke around and say, there's some motherfucker going around teaching everybody in this area. But essentially, that is what was happening.
You went to the strongest guy in the area and you asked to train with him and learn from him, and you ate shit or cleaned his garage or did whatever.
And it was vastly different sometimes. In the California range, it was high bar. Like Texas was, looking down, rounding over, Ripito type stuff. And, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, it was more, wide stance. And then New York, like moderate stance. And, this is when I started to look around okay, wait a minute. Maybe there's different ways to squat. For a while it was like push everybody out wide, make them sit back. And it's like, this shit ain't working. Some people can't do this. No. Why the fuck can't they do this? I go back and I'd ask Louie, why can't they do this? We're just forcing it. They're not,
they need a stronger low back.
Get
them reverse hyper.
Yeah.
Greg Panora tells a fantastic story at our seminars, and he talks about squatting 1,100 pounds, 1140, I think it was 1140 in meets in multiply at 242. And then he had his stroke, and he realized he can lift again after a stroke, and he's going to come back and do things raw. And he's all excited. Everyone in his gym, that he's like a fitness manager at like LA Fitness or some shit in Florida, South Florida at the time. And then they're all excited to see him, and he goes to squat 405 and falls over backwards. And at that point, he realized that he couldn't stand wide and sit back without his suit on, or he'd fall over backwards. So he's determined to learn how to squat with his quads. And he goes home and he grabs a broomstick. And for 100 reps every single day, and he still does this today, he squats with a broomstick 100 reps every day, just sitting straight down, ass to heels, ass to heels, ass to heels, ass to heels. Because he realized when he fell over, because they were all laughing at him. He's like, you're like, we're a world champion powerlifter, you're a record holder. Yeah, dude, you couldn't even squat 405. He's like, it was humbling, but it was also exponentially beneficial for him. He realized that, hey, what I'm doing in multiply doesn't work raw. And they ended up becoming a very good raw lifter after that. But he's like, I had to swallow my ego and realize there's a different way for everything.
I think there's another piece to that, because it's the same story. It was kind of Wendler's 531 and Brandon Lilly Cube. It's the same story. And the one piece, and I don't know how much it accounts. I'm not saying that that's not true. It is definitely true, because it's different muscles that are being activated and so forth, is the gear provides tactical cueing for them to put their body in certain positions.
Yes.
And now you take it away.
And the box as well for boxing.
Yeah, so now you take all that away. Their body doesn't know what the fuck to do. So I would think over 6 months, no matter how they trained, it was still going to come back to a much higher level. And it wasn't the training methodology that they were using in that bridge.
Any form of progressive overload
will
make you stronger. The question is, are you doing what's most optimal for you to get to your strongest?
Yes.
And that's the really hard nuance of coaching, is making sure you're choosing the right programming pattern, the right exercise selection, the right words, the right cueing. Because the reality is, if you take an absolute beginner and just give them any type of progressive overload, I don't care what the system is, I don't even care if it's the worst freaking program ever written, they're still going to get stronger. Because it's a new stimulus, they're learning spatial awareness, they're learning motor control, they're going to get stronger. And that's the newbie gains that everyone talks about. Then it starts to become a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more nuanced. In the first 6 months, the little shit doesn't matter. In the last 6 years of your training, the little shit really fucking matters.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I would even go back and say, if possible, in the first 6 months, they should learn proper technique.
It would help.
It would help
Yeah, so
tremendously.
you don't have to break bad habits.
Well, some of them can't be broke. It becomes so
It just takes
ingrained.
longer when they have a pattern.
Especially if they say they do this for 3 years, and then they become really strong. Now you're dealing with an ingrained movement pattern that I don't think you can change. You just have to work with.
Sure. So
You know.
I'll give you a great example of that. Chris Mason came to my seminar at the shop gym. The gym in Charlotte, Virginia. Now, if you don't know Chris Mason, he was a West Side lifter.
Yeah.
I don't remember what his nutrition company was, but he was also like one of the original online trolls of just ripping people apart who didn't understand periodization and science and lifting mechanics. And Justin Tooley's like, hey, guess what? Chris Mason's coming. I'm like, fuck. I'm the raw guy.
Yeah.
I fucking look weird. I act different. I'm like, he's gonna rip me a new one. And so I'm going through periodization models and talking through, and he's just kind of nodding his head. Doesn't find anything he wants to disagree with. I go through squat mechanics. He's the only one in the room who doesn't come up to get his squat work done, do things. We get the bench. And I get through almost everyone, and Chris is like, raises his hand, he's like, can I try? I'm like, shit, here we go. He gets on the bench and he moves, and this is just speaking on ingrained patterns, because the first thing he does is he lifts his head and he starts looking for the bar to touch his chest as if he's looking for it to touch in the shirt.
He's doing this raw.
He's doing this raw. And I'm like, I love your leg drive. I love your setup. I love everything about it. I said, can you do me one favor? I go, do you think you can try benching with your head down? I'm like, not just down. I go, can you possibly push it into the pad as hard as you can when you unrack the bar, and keep pushing it there when you go to press the bar, and not look at where the bar goes and touch your chest? And he's like, sure. And so he does it, and he gets off the bench. He's like, holy shit. He's like, my shoulders didn't round forward, my shoulders didn't hurt, and the bar moved 3 inches less. I was like, yeah. Your ingrained pattern is a shirted bench. I'm like, but you're fucking raw.
Yeah.
Just that one, I didn't change his technique, anything. I just asked him to press his head into the bench, and that changed the entire mechanics of his bench for raw. And I was like, oh, thank God. But
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like that was his ingrained pattern. So he had that. I don't want to call it a bad habit, because if he was still in a shirt, that'd be the absolute 100% best thing he could do. But it was his motor pattern still, even though he was out of the gear.
So to go back to the question that I was asking, would you say that the nuts and bolts, forget philosophy, the nuts and bolts took a decade for you to be able to really get a good grasp of?
Easily.
Okay.
Easily. What took me back then, because the resources weren't available, 10, 12 years. What people can learn now in 2 and 3, it blows my mind.
Okay. I don't know if it can do it in 2 or 3, though. That's kind of where
Information-wise, yes. Application, no. Application's
Yeah.
still going to take many more years.
Yeah, because it's I'm trying to figure out, it's because I had this rank your coach thing, which is, I don't know, 10 years old now. And I think I got it like 15 years or 10 years, whatever it is. And it needs adjusted, obviously, because there's more information than there was before.
And everybody's a coach.
Well, yeah. But, you take it down. I think if you take it down to a decade, then the nuts, if they're actually learning, right, and making mistakes, that's a big part. You got to make mistakes. Then I think there's, a decade is a good. And this is when people ask me, well, who's a good coach and all this other kind of stuff. There's a lot of factors and variables that play into that. But, a decade would be a good starting place if they're making mistakes, if they're learning. And a lot of coaches don't like to hear this because they don't have that decade.
Sure.
Right. And instead of just grinding as they should grind and not bitching about the fact that they don't have clients that they want to have. And you live in this world, so you've been in it for 20 years. You see how it kind of all works. And, but there's obviously more to it than just that one piece that falls into there. But since I've had the business, it's telling people learn all training methodologies, because I want them to find those nuts and bolts that are going to work no matter what style you're going to use.
Absolutely.
Even if you just go, at this point in your career, you could absolutely take somebody back to old school linear and make it work.
Yes.
Now, you may have to work with them in person to really regulate it, but you could make it work.
Or get them to buy into the long-term picture. That's the hardest part now, is getting people to see the long-term picture. Everyone's thinking in terms of 6 weeks at a time or from meet to meet. And I always remind people, like, what you lifted in your first meet is going to be laughable by what you lift 5 years from now if you make it 5 years. But if you're not programming yourself appropriately and being patient in the process, you won't make it 5 years. Every seminar I go to, I tell people to look around the room and let them know 50% of the people won't be there in 5 years. That's the statistic. 50% of people aren't still competing 5 years down the road. 75% are gone 10 years down the road. So if you've made it more than 10 years competing, you're still going, awesome, you did things right.
That's one of the biggest variables I have in the little clinics that I do, is try to get people to understand, like, figure out what they want to do. Like, what is it you actually want to do? because sometimes they don't even know that. So if you don't know what you want to do, that's problem number one, right?
Yeah.
And then, be realistic about it. Like, you're a power lifter. How many meets do you think this is going to take? And I'll ask these questions.
Yeah.
3 meets. Okay, well, in the real powerlifting world, that means 5.
Yeah.
Right? Because bad meets happen. Things don't always go as planned.
If you're there in 3 meets, you're the outlier.
So now five meets, and if there's 2 meets a year, 3.5 years. Okay, so now we're talking 4 years. And what I'm trying to do is to set them up, right? Set them up in a way to be able to circle back and say, okay, so now if you just take the next 12 weeks and only work on establishing better squat patterns, bench patterns, basically doing GPP work and fix all your technique with weights that you can do it with. That's nothing. 12 weeks is nothing out of 4 years.
But in their mind, it's 12 weeks where I'm working technique work. I'm not lifting heavy. And that is the instant gratification society that is hard to coach around sometimes now because of Instagram.
Yes.
So-and-so is doing this. They're going to be better than me. It's like, I had a meet where when she retired, she was the number 123 in the world. And I had a meet where I brought a CrossFit girl to this meet who knew her because she came from weightlifting, the background. And she's like, oh my God, I don't want to drop names. She's like, oh my God, so-and-so's in my division. What do I do? I'm like, you lift your best meet. I'm like, she's not very technically savvy and she's very aggressive with jumps and this isn't weightlifting. I go, you don't know what kind of day she's having. She can go 3 for 9. She ended up bombing out and my lifter took first place over her. And I'll always have a CrossFitter who took first place over this lifter who was one of the best all time and is still listed in like the top 6 Wilks in the whole 9 because she lifted her best meet. The lifter I went to the meet with went 8 for 9, PR'd across the board, and the lifter she was worried about bombed out a bench because she wasn't training a pause. And when she tried the pause, her butt kept coming up because she tried to heat it with her body. And so I knew that going in. I was like, well, that's why I always say prepare for the standards of the meet. I pause all my benches in training. I hesitate before I even start benching because I'm waiting for a start command. I drill listen to lifters all the time. I'm like, your bench look great, but I need you to wait a second before you start the bench. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, because that's what's going to be in a meet. I'm like, I don't care if you have a 2-second PR in the gym because if you want that PR in the meet, it's going to take 5. You have to condition to that position. And so I drill those basics into people's heads to train as if they're in the meet at all times. And that's what this lifter did and has that big win over it. And that's what happens is when people don't understand what they're actually preparing for.
Well, I think too that the pushback I'll have on the ones that will be influenced by what they see.
Yes.
Is they're really not all in for what they're doing.
No.
So if you see, this is if they tell me that their views are more important than their meet total, different training, different advice I'm going to give, right?
Yep.
And you as well.
Yeah.
But if they tell me, no, it's all about the meet, then they do all that other stuff, then they didn't define their why very well. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, no, I agree with you. I'm very happy that the majority of my lifts are higher in competition than in the gym.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this before that, you can put up a 700-pound deadlift and you're going to get 1,000 likes, but if you put up a 315 bench, you get like 400, and people will start gearing their programs towards that. This looks better for the gram, or this gets me more views. And if you're trying to build a brand or looking for something, I get it. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to be a powerlifter who wants to be top 5 in the world, you have to focus on the powerlifting, not the attention.
What was your percentage difference between, say, training max and a competitive max?
I don't think I've ever actually squatted more than 606 in the gym, so 628 in sleeves in a meet. I squatted only 640 in wraps and 683. The meet I was actually preparing for before I tore my adductor. That was a lot of external stress. My planned top squat was 699. And I smoked it, so I went up to 711 and the adductor tore on the way down. I was like, that was my fault for being a dumbass because it was only supposed to be 699. I took the one more I didn't need to at the highest stress point of my life. But they're generally much higher.
So 10%, 15%?
It's it's more like 3 to 5%, depending upon the lift. I don't take my heaviest lifts in gym. I save them for meet day because I'm waiting for super compensation to take place. And that's why I talked about at the beginning, like if you're taking your heaviest lift in the gym, you're much less likely to actually hit it in the meet because you're never allowing any chance for super compensation to get stronger because you've pushed past your threshold and it's going to take that much longer for you to recover.
Yes.
And then knowing your lifts, the lift that takes me the longest to recover from is my max deadlift. That takes me about 2 weeks. Squat, I'm used to a higher frequency of squat from the weightlifting, so I like to actually squat 2 or 3 days a week, and my recovery is relatively quick. I've taken a really heavy squat on a Friday and even heavier squat on a Sunday 2 days later and can still get away with it. I don't do that right before the meet. I allow for the recovery, but I did a squat in my garage that totaled like 670 at the top. It was like 120 in chain and whatever it was in the bar. I don't even remember. It was like 660, 670. And then I squatted 584 straight weight on Sunday. Those were my last 2 heavy squats before one of the meets I did earlier in the year, and I ended up squatting 628 in that meet as well, 622 or 620. I don't remember what it was, but much heavier in the meet. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand. It's like, well, I want to put this big one up before the meet. It's like, don't you want to win the meet? Don't you want to PR your lifts? Don't you want to PR your total? No. I got to put this up on Instagram for the meet. That's what their mindset's at. And that's what you're talking about is they don't understand their why.
Yes.
If their why is for the attention, they're only going to get so strong. If their why is for the meet, they're going to get that much stronger.
But where I have the confusion is when they'll sit there and tell me that they're all in. Like
They're all in on social media.
You see what I'm saying? Those are 2 words that, that I'm very intrigued with about the podcast, and Stacy was a good example,
Yes.
With the podcast that I had with her, because if somebody really, really, really goes that 100% all in something at some point in their life, they're going to be very hesitant to ever do it with something else again.
Yep.
Because it's more than what people think.
Well, she's done it twice now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I don't know if the bodybuilding is as much all in as what she was.
It is for her because she had anxiety with tracking food and tracking macros, which is how she got to 170 in the first place for the XPC.
Okay, so it is.
She had hired someone to help her with that, and she was just really anxious about it, and tracking made her uncomfortable. So slightly disordered eating to now she has it under control and has gone all in on the nutrition aspect. She was absolutely shredded for her first and second bodybuilding show. Most people don't get to that level. So she clearly went all in. She traveled. She came here. She packed all her food. She went to the airport everywhere. She traveled to events. She packed all her food. Like, she went all in. I've done that for a couple meets where, family engagements. Sorry, I can't come. I got a meet in 5 weeks, and I don't want to mess up my meal plan.
Yeah, but for many, I mean, she's in certain people.
Yes.
Define what I'm talking about with that. Other ones are only all in conveniently.
Yes.
So they'll miss the family function because they're all in, but they're still going to have fucking 8 bags of Oreos.
Yes, yeah.
Before training.
You can't be all in and half in. You're all in or not.
They're just convenient. It's like very conveniently all in.
Yes.
So it's a different thing, and where it gets thrown around an awful lot.
It takes a lot out of you mentally to go all in.
Yeah.
It is, like you said, it's very hard to do more than once or never look forward to wanting to do it again because of how much sacrificing you're going to make to get there.
Yes.
And
well, it's not just you; it's everybody
everyone,
around
yes.
you that has to sacrifice.
Yes.
I would actually go as far as to say you're not sacrificing anything because you're doing what you love.
Yeah, they are.
So it's that weird thing where it gets thrown around so easily, and it's like, just accept the fact that you're not all in, that you're 80% in, because that's still more than most people that are only 20%.
But that comes down to self-accountability and being able to regulate and admit that to yourself. And most people don't want to admit that they are their own fault.
But you see what I'm saying? You see where this all stems from is then that makes me question, and you work with a lot of clients, and that makes me question if you're working with somebody, and then because you have to change how you're going to work with that person based upon what their perceived level of commitment is. It doesn't mean you can't help somebody that's at that 2 or the 3. You most certainly can. But the way that you're going to work with them is going to be vastly different than Stacy.
You're not going to push them as hard. You're not going to drive them as hard because you're going to push them away or make them feel bad about what they're doing. I've done that, and every coach makes that mistakes where you think you're being encouraging and trying to remind them what their goal is, and all they feel is guilty about it because it wasn't their real goal. It was just kind of something they wanted, not something they needed. You can only go all in on something you feel you truly need. Otherwise, you're gonna at best half-ass it or give most of it your attention or 80% adherence, and that's still great. You're going to make progress. But like you said, truly going all in is an all-around sacrifice.
So with the clients and the communication that we're talking about here, you've had to learn how to do this, and you've been doing it for forever online, which has a shit ton of challenges with doing that. And years ago, I used to say it's impossible, but obviously it's not because people have been doing it. So how can it be impossible if people are doing it?
Not everybody has the training crew, and not every training crew is very good.
Yes.
So sometimes that is the case where someone recognizes the crew they train with, while encouraging and enthusiastic, isn't giving them the right techniques, the right cues, or the right programming. So they reach outward. Yeah. And then that upsets someone who's in charge of the crew sometimes, and that happens. There's a fall that happens. Or other times there are a case where somebody in person is better for them because somebody needs their fucking handheld.
Well, the crews are different though now, right? Because the crews are pretty much all generated by whatever the strongest guy does.
Yes.
Or woman, whatever it's going to be. So whoever that is.
Is that really any different?
It's the same fucking thing, right? But either way, whoever the top lifter is determining the whole program for everybody else.
Yeah.
Which means it's going to suck for everybody else.
It's good to be king.
It's you see, but you have to navigate this landscape now of you can't see every rep.
Sure.
You know, you can't see the intent or effort or intensity and all these other things.
You can see the intensity, you can see the effort, you can see the intention by the improvements they're making or not making. If you've seen a mobility restriction that they have, and you prescribe them things to do, and if it's not improving, you know, there's one aspect of you says, maybe I prescribed the wrong things, but 9 out of 10 times they're not actually fucking doing it.
Okay.
They're wanting to get better, but they're actually wishing to get better because they're not doing what they have to get better.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who's constantly dehydrated, you tell them to drink more water, and it's up to them to drink more water. You can't follow them around all day with a gallon of water. It's time to drink, time to drink, time to drink. Same thing with people who don't eat or people who don't sleep and people who don't do things. It's like, I'm giving you the tools, you just have to fucking use them.
Yeah.
And so you can see that their level of commitment by their level of intention, their level of follow through. So if someone needs to gain more mobility to pull sumo and they're not getting more mobility, and you can be like, are you doing this every day like I asked you? Every morning, are you doing these Cossack strokes and the isolated adductor stretch? Yes. No, you're not. I'll tell you that I have daily homework and I do them all the time when I'm home, but if I'm traveling, they never get done. So I wouldn't lie to you and tell you I'm doing them every day. But if you told me I'm up to like 3 days a week, I still have room to improvement, cool. We've identified what we can do. We can improve there. You're showing me that you care because you're being honest with yourself and honest with me, and we can still improve. So if you're not seeing the improvements that you think you should be seeing, it usually means they're not doing what they should be doing. But like you said, the pushback will be on somebody else.
Yeah. But how are you able to do that with the number of clients that you have?
You're not always guaranteed to do it. There's no 100% accuracy.
Yeah.
I can give them all the encouragement. I can give them the tools. I can keep changing program. I can provide them support. I can give them cues. But at the end of the day, you're only as good as a coach as the athletes you're working with who are willing to do those things. Even the best coach will have an athlete who's refusing to do things. That doesn't make them a bad coach. It just made them a bad fit for that athlete because you haven't got them to buy into a point, or it just makes them a bad athlete because they don't want to buy into the process necessary to improve. And sometimes that's the case. I try to vet on my questionnaire people who throw up red flags, who are overly egotistical or demanding of certain things. I try to vet those out now because they just end up in more frustration for me because I know I can't help them because they don't want to be helped. If they're already dictating to you what they want to do and how they want to do it, you can't coach them. They're telling you, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it. Like, why are you reaching out to me? Write your own shit.
Well, that would be my question.
Yeah.
Like, why are they reaching out?
Because they think if they hire the coach, they're going to be better. There's a lot of people who think if they just hire this well-known coach or this well-known person or this strong person, they're going to automatically better. And in this day and age, unfortunately, a lot of people also hire influencers for clout, so they can be shared in their stories or tagged or get seen by more people because those people don't care about.
Fuck! I didn't even think about that. So
Happens all the fucking time.
That's a whole other level.
Yeah,
of
who's
right
who's
there.
hot right now? Let me hire them. Let me get the attention. Let me get shared in their stories and the whole nine. It happens, and that's not an athlete you can necessarily help to your fullest degree. You can still guide them in the right direction. You can give them all the tools, but you can only help them as far as they're willing to help you back.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we were talking about off camera, that since we're talking about clients and that client relationship, is, you know, lifetime value. And I think that plays into the conversation with people that want to build a client base, because I don't think they think about this, for one thing. But if they did, they may go about the way that they're doing their training of their clients differently, right? So if they're just banking on the fact that somebody's just going to come in for 12 weeks or whatever it's going to be, and then they're in and they're out, then the way they're going to conduct their business and their service is going to reflect in that.
Yes.
Where if they knew, you know, and I guess when you just get into it, you're not going to know, right? But if they knew the potential lifetime value of this client can be 3-4 years, then that's going to change everything.
As long as you're providing them value, continually teaching them, continually listening to them, and responding to them, there's no reason for them to want to move off unless you're just literally not providing them any value. Sometimes it's a personality clash.
Yeah.
Like I have a very different personality. It could be considered obtuse by some people, which is fine, but I'm not the right fit for them.
That's going to be true with anybody.
Anybody.
Yeah.
Yes. So sometimes that's just the case. Sometimes it's just a personality clash.
Yeah. But you see what I'm saying? If these coaches would think
long term, same way they do their programming.
You know, just build this into the coaching that you're doing, then you're not going to have to throw up new marketing every 3 months to be able to fill spots that you just keep losing.
But that also comes to not explaining why they're doing something.
What do you mean?
So when an athlete says, why am I doing high bar this block? you better have a fucking answer.
Yeah.
You better say to them I want to focus on your quads. I want to keep an upright posture. I think you're sitting back too much. This will force you to have forward knee travel. You better have a reason. Like you said, we use the word intention a lot. So every exercise should have a purpose. And there's a lot of coaches who just recycle programming or put things in there or do something to make somebody tired, junk volume. I've seen programs that had 4 quad exercises followed by 3x50 single leg extensions. Give me a reason why there's a single leg extension 3x50 in a powerlifters program. And you better have one, because that's building nothing but single joint endurance. It's not doing anything that's transferable for power or force generation. What's your reason? And that's the problem, is some newer coaches or less educated or experienced coaches are just trying to make people tired. And they're not trying to make people better. And one of the ways you are going to have that lifetime customer value is constantly be teaching them how they could be better. And that's the fundamental stuff. Teach them the importance of their sleep cycle. Teach them the importance of hydration. Teach them the importance of knowing what their macros are. Even if they loosely track them or follow them, at least knowing that they're meeting their protein requirements, because how are they going to get bigger and stronger if they're not feeding themselves what they need to get bigger and stronger? The value from the customer is the value you continue to provide them. So if they're looking in terms of, I only have this person for 12 weeks, whatever, and you're not providing them value, you've lost 2 ways, because then you have a short-term client, but that client's also not going to recommend you to anybody else either.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't advertise. I've never put 3 spots available, DM me for coaching. It doesn't even say it doesn't even say, for coaching, contact me here in my bio. It says none of that. It's simply just been word of mouth of, this person will teach you how to have better form, better mechanics. They will listen to you, respond to your messages in a timely manner, and so forth. It's just been word of mouth for so many years.
With going back to your track of learning the program and all that, at a certain point in every strength coach, his career, whatever you want to call it, you have to start digging into hypertrophy stuff too, right? Because it's either in a block or it's going to be part of some conjugate program on the back end. It needs to play into there. When did you start digging into those resources? Was that early on, or did that come later?
I started with a bodybuilding, well, not that I ever wanted to step on stage, but I was devouring bodybuilding education back then as my primary starter, because that was the easiest transition to the gym. I loved the gym. It felt great to be there. And so I did the bro splits. Where it was then to where that information is now is insane. If you look back at some of the old, if you look back at the Arnold Schwarzenegger encyclopedia, it's terrible. Reality is it's the Deload method, which was 1926. Deload was the medical doctor for the military who got soldiers back, and that was where 3 times 10 came from. And some of the research we were talking about off camera before is ridiculous, because there's a Japanese study showing slow controlled tempoed reps, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, being better than a regular concentric, 1 second concentric, 1 second eccentric, but they used the same load. So one was doing 6 reps that took 36 seconds, and the other was doing 6 reps that took 6 to 7 seconds, and it was the same 50% load. Well, he never got in close to proximity of failure, so he did nothing to stimulate hypertrophy. We understand the mechanisms that stimulate hypertrophy so much more now, whether it be the volume or the load is almost irrelevant. It's proximity to failure within a certain range. I don't want to say irrelevant, but almost, because there's a threshold. If you're going beyond 30 reps, you're training more endurance than you are hypertrophy. But 3 to 30 is that rep range for that. It's not so much the time under tension, it's the proximity to failure. That's more important. Or like we were talking about, stretch mediated hypertrophy, so going through fuller ranges of motion, where a lot of times people are doing partial reps. I don't know if you remember, Peter Sisko had power factor training, which is basically the 20-year revision of the Bob Hoffman partials. God, I'm old.
Well, I know all this shit too.
I've never got to sit with somebody who knows them all.
No, I know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm well read. It's one of those things where things come and they go in spurts. If you look at instability training, was the rage in the fucking 90s with stability balls and wobble boards, and everyone thought this was the way to prevent injuries, and all of a sudden realized, well, there was a big missing component of that, and that was load. So now we understand instability is still very important. It can be useful as a supplementary movement or corrective, but it needs to be progressively loaded. You can't just do dumbbell presses on a ball where you're sacrificing 300 pounds of load versus, if you want to make your bench press unstable, you take your feet off the floor, or you use some hanging kettlebells to make the bar shake and wobble. That way you're still getting the load stimulus plus the instability stimulus to build, stabilize your muscles and so forth. We just understand things much better. There's much more research available now and accessible, and people have weekly newsletters where they're giving you Menno Henselman's, I hope I said that correctly, is a great resource for bodybuilding stuff and strength stuff, because he constantly goes over the studies, and we'll talk about what might be lacking for the study. You've had Greg Knuckles on.
Oh yeah,
same
the
thing.
master review is awesome.
Greg Knuckles talked about the same thing. He's almost hinting at the same way I do accelerated block programs, where he talks about each component you train will probably get lost within 4 weeks after you stop that component. Well, if you're doing it for 2 weeks, you're never really losing touch with that component. You come back to it much quicker, which is why I shortened it, because our sport is our practice, and so forth. So I look at information like that, and that's what molds my principles and my philosophy, not a system.
So when when you say, the 2 weeks and all that, for the people that are listening that understand programming, is earlier when I said powerlifting is kind of like easy from a programming standpoint compared to other sports, because other strength coaches could be listening to this is working with, track and field athlete or a football player. There's more than 2 components.
There's where concurrent really fucking shines.
No, that's
field and sport athletes.
Yeah, because that's when you have the transition blocks and how long will this motor ability last before it needs to come back in.
Right.
I love that shit, by the way. I geek out on trying to.
I do
it's
too.
Fun, but
because
it's
if
not
I want to protect the powerlifter,
though.
I'm going to look at the guys who have to deal with multi-million-dollar athletes. It's their single job is to get them stronger and keep them healthy.
Yes, but they're different sports though, right?
Yes.
So to me, one's way easier to program for than another one that has a 20-week season.
Yes.
Then they're all beat to shit after the season, and then there's all these other abilities that need to be factored in there. It's fun, looking at all those parts, but the big part of me is like, thank God I don't have to actually figure all that shit out, because now you got all these other things that play into there. But going back to the hypertrophy is and obviously this, there's people that are going to push back and say, well, no, it's the volume, it's the volume, it's the volume, it's the volume. We know that. Right? Granted, I don't think they're right, but anyhow, they know that's the pushback. But for the strength sports athlete coach,
Right.
you can't do it. So if you're putting the strength work in the way that you're supposed to, you can't stick in all this volume that those bodybuilding school guys are going to say have to go in there.
No,
you can't.
What are you trying to create hypertrophy on is the question there that gets answered there. And it's, the periodization models is for the main secondary lifts. That's what the periodization models are for.
Yeah.
Everything else is done in a hypertrophy range.
Well, we're also trying to find out how to do it in the most economical, time-efficient way, because it's not the number one priority, but it is a priority.
The downside of that is people hear things like economical, time efficient, they start thinking giant sets and supersets.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
So, what he means by that is, I'm assuming you mean by that is, it doesn't have to be 5 by 15 for every exercise that follows. It could be, if you want to do 2 back exercises, maybe it's 2 to 3 sets, 12 to 15 reps, 2 reps in reserve each set, and then you can progress it over the weeks where it's 1 rep in reserve, or maybe you're lowering it to 8 to 12. You start lowering the rep ranges as it gets heavier, because I like to do that. As the lifts progress heavier, I like to make the accessories a little bit heavier as well. So I might start them at the beginning of the block at 15 reps for RDLs, but by the end of the block, it might be as low as 6 to 8, because I want them to get stronger too. And I don't want them to only train that in a muscular endurance range. I want them to also train that heavy, because those ancillary muscles need to be strong too. But that's how I look at it is your main 2 lifts are your periodization. Everything beyond that is accessory. It's done in a bodybuilding format, but even the bodybuilding format is linearly progressed to overload at some capacity. And I tell people your accessory should be somewhere between like an RPE 9-10 realistically, unless it's the first week of the block or the deload.
Yeah.
Push those as close to failure as you can. If you're going to miss a lift in training, I'd rather be an accessory lift.
Yeah. The RPE, I think a lot of people get confused when you're talking accessories, because now you're talking really effort.
Yes.
Than you are percentage of a 1 rep max. So as we've said earlier, there's flaws in all of it. As long as it's defined between you and the athlete, you and the coach and the athlete on the same level.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what it is.
So I have guidelines I send every new athlete, and it says this is to help you get the most out of coaching and training. These are frequently asked questions. These are guidelines. And it talks to them if they want to change an exercise, make it mechanically similar, such as if I have chest-supported rows, you can do a seal row, you can do a chest-supported machine, you can do incline dumbbell chest-supported rows. It's still the chest-supported row. You can change it. If you want to use accommodating resistance, we're going to use probably 10% accommodating resistance. So if it calls for 70% weight, use 60% straight weight, 70% accommodating resistance. It's going to equal out to that range, or actually I think I have 10 to 15%. So it equals in range of what that working weight's supposed to be. You can always mix that in there. Very few people actually take the time to read the guidelines, but they're in there.
Yeah.
I try to make it easier on everybody.
No, but it makes it easier when you get the question to say just link back, to whatever that is. I assume with your back, the prehab, rehab, mobility, whatever you want to say, that came in early.
Yes, it did.
Right.
Yep.
So how has that progressed and changed over your time as a coach? Well, two ways, in your head, but also just in general throughout the whole landscape.
First is in fear. When you hurt yourself that severely to the point where you're hospitalized for something, you're deathly afraid to repeat that pattern that caused the injury, the issue in the first place. And it was a conventional rack pull that was 1 inch above the ground with 610 is what I heard it on. Obviously now I've pulled 793, 794 beltless sumo, but it's one of those things where your initial phase is rebuilding the confidence to repeat the motor pattern again. I think I've since pulled 635 conventional beltless as well. Just you start getting to a point where you start upping that threshold a little bit more every year of how much more you're willing to try and risk and tolerate and get there, and you realize I'm stronger, I'm safe. The second part of that question is figuring out what was the root cause of it in the first place. And that's something that's highly debatable right now. People will talk about it being poor form. People will talk about it being overuse. People will talk about it being fatigue. Reality is it's probably somewhere in between all of those things. We know you're more susceptible to injury when you're in an extremely fatigued state or a dehydrated state. So if we can avoid that, that's why we do deloads. That's why we try to sleep. That's why we eat. Great. Life's not perfect. Things happen. But if we can avoid that, great. But I think the risk factor does go a little higher if you have suboptimal technique or if you have weak bracing or weak core. So if you couple that with the fatigue, then you're much more susceptible. Back then, we didn't really know what core strength was. The closest I came to core strength was, of course, you know, Louis was a big fan of decline sit-ups and standing abs.
Yeah. Train your abs. Yeah.
Train your abs.
Train your abs.
Which is a blanket statement of abs. Pavel Satselin was talking about the Jean de sit-up was using reciprocal inhibition of activating the hamstring, so you weren't going into anterior tilt, you're going into posterior tilt to shorten the rex abdominis. And we really know now it's a conglomerate of muscle groups between your internal oblique, external oblique, your diaphragm, your transverse abdominis, your psoas to a degree, your QLs. Everything is used to stabilize the pelvis during loading and movement. And that's really where the second stage comes in, is rebuilding that structural pattern underneath the bar. Because you are only as strong as what you can stabilize through the entire range of motion. If you can stabilize 120% of the top, but you can only stabilize 80% of the bottom, you're only as strong as the 80%. And that's where the things go wrong. Is so figuring out where your energy leak is and where your weakness is, and sometimes that is the supplemental work or that is the accessory work. And I emphasize to people, so I was one of the first coaches that I know of to put warm-ups in athletes' programs specifically for them, not just get on the bar and see how you feel, maybe do a couple of minutes on the bike. I put very specific warm-ups in their program from like McGill's work and from things like that, like the bird dogs, dead bugs, hip airplanes, and things like that. I was putting them in there. And I put them in there first for the reason, because if I put them in there last, they were going to skip them.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody walks out and I'll do abs tomorrow, and tomorrow never happens. I mean, tomorrow was here, but the abs didn't.
Yeah.
So I was putting them in the beginning, and people are like, well, if I do all that, I want to be fatigued. I'm like, no, you're going to condition yourself to handle more load, because you're going to do those every single time you're in the gym. And you're not going to skip them because it's your warm up. And I'll be able to tell if you're doing them because the bar is going to fucking move better.
Yeah.
You're going to be stronger in core, and you're going to create more power. So that's the importance of actual core and not just rectus abdominis, is if you can create a stable shelf and have more structural balance under the bar, you're going to move more load. I'm so much stronger now post-injury, and I'm missing body parts than I was before, because every time I've hurt myself, I've learned something was missing. Let's build around that. Let's get stronger from it. I didn't get more technically sound. My technique hasn't changed dramatically unless I had to because of an injury. I got structurally stronger, and that's what allows me to move more load.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is we were talking about earlier, you know, the old school, right? Your old school. Like the old school.
I'm a master's.
What the fuck do I say now? So now I come from the old school because I got to add an old to it.
Yeah.
When I was, one of the things that Louis taught me when I first got there, and actually embraced what he was doing, because that wasn't true when I first got there. But when I first, because I came from block, you know,
Yes.
so when I get in there, it's like, what the fuck, you know, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And it was just like some crazy weird shit that doesn't make sense to me. And so once that came through, it was, and I think this is one of the things that got lost, you know, after my time there, is we always started every training session with the pull down abs, the reverse hypers, the glute ham raises, and none of it was hard.
No.
It was just more activation.
You're prioritizing what's more important.
Yeah, but it was also a backup, you know, that if you weren't, you know, we did them again later, hard.
Yeah.
You know, but that was just to get everything moving and everything going. And it didn't make sense. It just became habit.
Yeah.
You know, because it was always there. And this is why I don't do reverse hypers now, because it was fucking always there all the time. All the fucking time. You have no fucking idea. Nobody has any fucking idea. It's like 16 times. It was fucking ridiculous. But anyhow, it just became this ingrained habit where, looking back, you know, I can see what was good about it. I can see what was bad about it. But what was good about it, it was always there. You know, and it was always some kind of integrated warm-up to be able to have that. Now, should the exercises have changed in the 10 years? Probably.
But it also, it's like a switch. I'm wearing pants, which people can't see that, but if you know me, I don't ever wear fucking pants. It's cold here, it's snowing out, so I have pants on. And it's one of those things where in training, I'm almost always in shorts, and there's a ton of videos of me in my freaking underwear in my garage. And there's that switch. Like if I'm getting to a top set that I know it's actually heavy, the first thing that happens is my pants come off. And it wasn't meant to be my switch, but it was meant to be when we were looking and we started video, and video was fucking cool. We're like, I can actually see if I'm at depth now.
Yeah.
So when I was training with all these guys, we were taking our pants off because that's why you compete in a singlet, so they can see your hip crease, and I can actually see in my compression underwear if I'm at fucking depth. But it became an ingrained switch of every time I took my pants off, that was my top set. That was my heavy set. I'm ready to go. The warm-up is the same thing. Like life fucking sucks for a lot of people, especially right now. It's really hard, shit goes on. But when you come in the gym, the second you start warming up, you're acknowledging I'm getting ready to do work. So it turns on a mental switch as well. And people use the word priming, and people argue that it's priming your brain. You're preparing yourself to do something that's important to you, and you can shut off all the world outside if you just get in there and make that habit of every time I come in here, I'm gonna do this. You'll see me at a meet get on the floor and do dead bugs and bird dogs because I'm not about to hurt myself again. And I'm gonna make sure that I'm ready to lift whatever I have to in a meet. I've seen people write books on the importance of warm-ups and do things. And I go to a meet, and the first thing they do is get under a bar. I'm like, why would you write that if you don't actually fucking do it? But I'm in a meet doing dead bugs and bird dogs and hip airplanes before I get into the freaking squat bar to warm up. Like I live my bullshit.
I quit paying attention to all the debates or crap that goes on in the industry probably like 5 years ago. How much of it now, because the reason I quit paying attention to a lot of it was because at the root level it was semantics.
Yes,
People
always.
were just defining things in different ways, where if they just would fucking define what they're actually debating, like how do you define volume? How do I define volume, right? What is that? Because, you know, at some point you'll find, for me, I'll define it as sets times reps because that's how I was trained. I don't include weight in there. That's called workload. But if you don't know how I define volume, but then we're talking about volume, you see the disconnect.
And it can be described as number of barbell lifts, total workload, total tonnage moved, and everyone will have a different definition of what volume is.
So I ask, you know, it's crazy, right? Crazy thought. Like, let's just ask what the fuck we're doing.
As long as they have an answer for you. Like a lot of times, as long as they have a reason for it, it's probably going to work. Even if the reasoning is wrong, if they have a reason for it, the belief is there, and that's a placebo effect. And the placebo effect is still an effect.
Yes,
it's going to work.
It's just it's a weird industry because, you know, people have there's a lot of positioning. It's been there forever, since the 50s. It's all positioning. Like they're going to position here so they can sell more product or whatever services or whatever they're going to do. So they position things in different ways to make them look like they know things that other people don't know. So it can be the definition of a word. But then 20 years goes by, and then that definition of a word it's really no longer wrong because there's now 20 years behind somebody misinterpreting the word. Like conjugate could be one of those, you know, concurrent.
It
conjugate.
means so many different things to so many different people.
So it's a lot, you know. So if somebody
my favorite is what's conjugate? That's when you use bands and chains.
And well, exactly, right? And it's like, well, you know, the word actually means to couple,
right?
So if but if
working
you don't,
multiple capacities at the same time within the same program.
Yes, but if it's not defined in these people, then this big stupid ass debate starts to form over something that's just dumb.
I don't take part in online debates. I don't
yeah,
answer people because it's always someone grandstanding to try and look like they're smarter than somebody else, or to get attention that, or hoping other people will read them. Like, I want to work with this guy because he's smart and he understands things. That's not how it works. There's a Mark Twain quote: "When you argue with a fool, you become one." And there's a second Mark Twain goes like similar to that: "When you argue with a fool, no one can tell who the fool is."
Well, the other thing I would put out there is it's pretty much dead giveaway that you have too much free time.
Yes.
And if you have too much free time, then you're probably not.
If I'm asked, I'll discuss it on our podcast, the Strength and Success Show, or I'll discuss it in a video. Like there was a hot topic that came up where a young man said knees behind the bar is ideal for sumo, and I didn't think he was wrong in any degree, but it's a position that only 20% of people can achieve who are hypermobile and have long limbs. So Bridgeford was arguing that knees over the bar gives them more quad power, more break to the floor. Crisp isn't wrong. This young man, I think his name is Nabel, he's not wrong either. It just, each one has a pattern that works better for them. So I shot a clip real quick earlier about that. You know, your position dictates whether or not your knees are behind the bar or over the bar or in front of the bar. You know, the more narrow your stance is, the more your knees have to be in front of the bar. There's no one who's going to reach that bar with a vertical shin and a narrow stance. That's called conventional. You're not going to sumo that way. And I gave two different lifters as an example. So he wasn't necessarily wrong, but he made a very blanket statement that everyone would be better this way, and that shows someone who has no coaching experience, because he's not everyone, he's himself. He's figured out the best way for him, not the most ideal way for other people. And that's to be expected. I think he's like 18 or 19 years old. He doesn't have a lot of life experience or coaching experience or practical experience with training. So that's what he's found to be best for him. So his assumption, his availability bias is this is the best way for everybody. It's just a youth thing. So I don't take part in those arguments that were going online. I know a lot of people did. I don't need my name to be put in there. I'll just film what I think is appropriate and content and release it for everyone, or I'll have you guys release it. And so people can understand, okay, this is my opinion. And I'm not saying my opinion is right or wrong. I'm just saying subjectively, this is what I see. Yeah,
no, I'll step back and say it's good to pay somewhat attention for what you just said.
Yes.
Because you've been doing this for 20 years. It gets really fucking hard to come up with new content to put out. You know, so content ideas, you know, can be generated from a lot of those things.
Mine are literally mid-workout, one take only. I'll never reshoot one, and they're never planned or preceded. They're literally out of breath.
Yeah.
Owen can attest to that. Out of breath, mid lifting, during the workout, during like I either know it or I don't, and I'm gonna say my piece and that's it, because it's gonna help somebody.
Yeah.
I don't plan out scheduled content. I don't put things together. I don't have presentations and slide boards, because no one's paying attention to that. This is the Instagram generation. You've got them for 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, and if you can't get your point across in that amount of time, they stop listening. Yeah. There's a lot of people in this field who have masters or doctorates, and they can't attain a service client-based business because they can't speak the athlete's language, because they're stuck in clinical terminology. They're trying to justify their student loans by sounding incredibly intelligent, but your athlete doesn't understand a word you're saying. So we talked about buy-in earlier and coaching. That's probably the skill set that I have that separates me from most coaches, is being able to simplify the complex in a way that the athlete's going to understand.
Yeah.
Because if you and I are talking about, you know, Vladimir Sherman and block periodization and transmutation, accumulation and actualization, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You're going to smile and you say, I know, get it. 9 out of 10 people watch this the fuck did he just
say?
They
don't know.
Change the channel.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if I say to them, hypertrophy, strength, peaking, oh, okay.
Yes. The other big component of training was going to be the outside factors, right? Where we can get away with it, not paying attention to those in your 20s, you know, your teens for sure. But at some point in time, even if you, and I'm going to go on a whim here and say, most of us don't pay attention to those until we absolutely have to.
That's correct.
And then it's like, whap, right? Yeah. And then we feel like we're speaking in a hurricane when you're trying to tell, you know, the younger lifters that things like sleep and nutrition and at the basic level nutrition are important. So was that the same case with yourself?
100%.
So how do you bridge that gap with your clients now to let them know that these things matter? Yes, you're going to have good and bad days. Yes, for a strength athlete. See, I'm pausing because I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Like, I don't want to say nutrition's not important, because it is, but hydration, you know, protein intake, there's certain variables that are more important than others.
It's the most underrated aspect with the most value of return on effort.
Yes.
That's the best way to look at it.
So how would you, let's go with the rest and sleep first, because they're two different things too.
When you're a child and your parents give you a bedtime, you fucking hate it. When you're a grown up and you're responsible and you absolutely want to be the best you possibly can, the first thing you give yourself is a bedtime. I go to bed the same time every night. My alarm goes off the same time every day. Whether I want to or not, that's what it is, because that's going to make me most productive and most on schedule to eat the meals I need to eat, to get the sleep I need to get. And I have a 9-hour window from my bedtime to wake up to make sure. I'm not a great sleeper, so I make sure I give myself the extra hour because I want to try to get 7-8 hours of sleep every night. But that's really the difference maker, because we talked about that injury rate going significantly up when you were fatigued. So if you're not recovering from workouts, there's no magic pill. There's no supplement that's going to magically make up for your indiscretions of late nights, early mornings. I do love caffeine more than the next guy, but it's not something I'm relying on to get through my day. I'm relying on my structure, my schedule. Sleep is the biggest priority. I know Stan Efforting has talked about this, something like every 1 hour, and I don't know how true this is, but every 1 hour after midnight is like missing 2 hours or something, like some bullshit like that. And 1 hour before it's like gaining 2 hours as far as recovery and strength adaptation is concerned, because that's when our body is slowing down, regenerating and rebuilding. And if you're always tearing it down and you're always burning the candle at both ends, you are not going to thrive. You're going to burn out very, very fast. That's one of the reasons why people burn out of this sport. It's because they push too much. They never recover. They're not patient. They burn out mentally before physically. Physically, they can keep going. Mentally, they can't. But if you don't take the time to reset that clock every night and let yourself rest, you're not going to get as far as you could. Sleep is that number one priority. You can't live without sleep. You can live like 28 days without water. You can only live like 1 week without sleep. It should be the first thing you prioritize. That's why I have a bedtime. It's weird, but like my phone goes off and away from me at like 10 p.m. It's time to get my stuff together. I'll prep my next day. I'll take out any supplements, pills I need for the morning, make any shakes or drinks I need for the next day. Stay away from the TV, stay away from the phone because I don't want the blue light, and I want to try to like clean up and go to bed, and hopefully I can fall asleep, sometimes more successful than others, but I'm giving myself the opportunity to recover because that's what's going to bring forward my best. We, on our podcast, Riley and I suggest that every week. I don't think there's a single week goes by on the Strength and Success podcast that we don't talk about sleep, hydration, and nutrition being priority in someone's life. The fun part is training. You get to do that.
Yeah.
The hard part is making sure you're optimally fueled and rested for that. And that doesn't take much more effort than just scheduling it the same way you schedule your job or your day or your holidays. You just schedule around what times you should be eating, how much you should be having, how much sleep do you need? Do you need 7 hours? Well, if you're going to bed at midnight and your alarm's at 6, that's only 6 hours, and it's going to take you 30 minutes to fall asleep, so that's 5.5 hours. You've already behind the game. You need to learn how to set an alarm on your phone. My phone has a sleep alarm. It has a sleep alarm and it lets me know, and things shut off. So even though my phone's on Do Not Disturb, everything shuts off. Nobody can get through at that point in time. So if it's an emergency, call 911.
I think the biggest thing that you just said there is you have the 9 hour time.
Yeah.
That's in there.
Yep.
Because where things can get really dicey is people won't have that doesn't mean you're sleeping for the 9 hours. You may only sleep for
resting.
4 or 5,
Yeah.
but you're just resting,
Yep.
right? Because where things will get dicey is, people start drinking a bottle of NyQuil, 2 Tylenol PM, Xanax, and all this different shit to force themselves to sleep, right? And then they're not getting the actual deep sleep and rest that they need.
I'm a lifelong insomniac. I've been an insomniac since I was a child, and so it's very tough. So I do take things to help me sleep and facilitate that. But that's also what brought me to the strength world, is because when I couldn't sleep as a child, I put on ESPN2, and I'm watching, the World's Strongest Man at 2 a.m., and I'm watching Ed Cohn in the Mountaineer Cup. And that was one of my first powerlifting experiences that made me want to do this.
Yeah.
He walks out with like 881, I think it is, in a single ply suit. I didn't know it was single ply, but he walks out like 881, and before he squats, his nose bursts and it's dripping down his face, and he just dunks this and comes right back up and smiles through the blood. I'm like, I want that kind of confidence. Like, that's why I want to powerlift, and so I do. I still have yet to have a bloody nose. I'm too healthy for that shit. But
I'm gonna gain weight.
I really need to work on. I need to work on my blood pressure, I guess. I still have
yeah.
yet to have a bloody nose powerlifting. I've bled everywhere else. I bleed every freaking session from somewhere, whether my thumbs or my shins. I bleed, but no bloody nose. But that was that moment of like unwavering and unnerving confidence and happy about it. I'm like, that's what I need to do. That was like, that set the life tone. And it's ironic that happened at 2:30 in the morning, and now I'm like pontificating about like 10 o'clock, all lights go off. I go to bed.
Yeah.
But that's what it's got to be. If you want to be the best, you have to expect the best from yourself. You're in charge of that.
Yeah. Well, I think before getting into the nutrition, the confidence is a huge thing. That it can be trained for one thing, where I'm not this believer in you're just born this way, with whatever mindset. Yes, there are probably genetic factors that are associated with that, but that doesn't mean it can't become better than what it is.
Absolutely.
And because when you're lifting big weights, you need confidence. Like, people will ask me something like, do you need the ammonia? Do you need to scream? Do you need to pace? Do you need to do this? Like, you need to do, or music. I mean, you need to do whatever you need to do to be able to be confident that you can do it while staying on this side of the arousal curve.
Yep.
And that's a whole nother discussion. With those people, it's another discussion because you go too far over that. Some people need music. Some people just need quiet. Some people they're all different, because I'm sure you've seen it too, where people will say, man, imagine if they could really get fired up, what they could do.
I think Amber Hansen commented about that on the surgery. She was one of the commentators. And she's like, the crowd's going to have to hype him up because he won't hype himself up. I'm a very calm lifter now. 10 years ago, I was a motherfucker pacing back and forth, slamming his head to the wall. I got over my anger. I like to be cerebral and focused and intentional with my movements, and I'm confident in what I'm going to lift. I've earned. So I don't think about it as a heavy weight. I think about it, I'm taking what I earned. Yeah. It's a different thing, but I had to talk myself into that. I was very unconfident as a youth and very, very shy and introverted, and certain things I've achieved and gotten over that. And that's Stacy's biggest skill set, is she has an incredible belief in her ability in herself.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what's on the bar. She's like, how fast am I going to move it? And it was just plugging in the parts of fixing what she needed to fix or building what she needed to build to do so. And that's what her mission is now, is making sure people can become self-aware and self-confident. That's the whole point of her champion mindset, is building someone's self-confidence, because you're not going to be your best self unless you love yourself in that manner and tell yourself you're worthy and you're capable. And so majority of my youth, I was telling myself I was unworthy and incapable, and that's why I didn't powerlift. You briefly mentioned it. I picked up Powerlifting USA, and I saw the 148s were squatting 640s, Tony Conyers. Didn't know he was in gear, but he squats like 648, I think it is, or 646, whatever it was, at 148. And I'm like, I'm just squatting 585 now, and I'm 205. I'm like, and that's gym high. It's not even the comp depth. I'm like, fuck. I actually told this story to Tiffany Connors, his daughter, like a meet 20 years later, and that kept me out of powerlifting for the longest time. No matter how many people told me I was strong, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't strong enough, so I didn't compete. And then I started to find local strongman competitions, and they're like, you can wear whatever you want. I'm like, maybe I'll go try it. And I found a couple friends who were gullible enough to come with me and do it too, and there you go. That's the start. But that's the key, is belief.
Yeah.
When you believe in yourself and you honor yourself in that aspect, you'll start going to bed on time because it matters to you. You'll drink less as far as alcohol because it matters to you. You'll drink more water because it matters to you.
Yeah, because it's going to put you in a better position.
Sure.
That's the part that I have always loved about powerlifting more than anything else, is that mental aspect, of being prepared enough to put yourself in the best position to do whatever that top set is. Sure. That's hard. They're not always hard, but the top set that's hard, to put yourself in that best position, to have the confidence to do what you're supposed to do, and to have the confidence even when you don't have the confidence. Because there's an inner battle sometimes.
Yes.
Where you're like, you don't know, and then you get mad because you don't know.
The reason why you don't know is because you know you didn't do what you were supposed to
Exactly.
get there.
Exactly.
Am I strong enough to lift this? Is basically saying, did I do enough to deserve this? Is what you're really saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you can take the weight out, or you can grab the weight, or it's a lift it off, and you're for a split second, you're like, fuck. And then you're like, what did I just do?
Right.
And then you got to self-correct. And I think that those mental attributes carry over to everything.
Yes.
Because if you can figure it out and pivot fast, because that you have to, or you just get crushed.
No, yeah, 100%.
You just have to. Then that carries over, like I said, to everything.
This is a sport of habits. And that's why I tell people your gym habits become your meet habits. And if you haphazardly lift in the gym, you're going to haphazardly lift in a meet, and you're going to have bad things. People miss the commands because that's why I drill, like, wait that 1 second. If you unrack a bench, wait a second. Because unless you're in the APF, you're going to have to.
Well, the habits outside of the gym also impact
your gym.
The gym habits.
Yep.
So that's the cool thing.
Yeah.
That's the awesome thing about the whole. That's why I still kind of train like a power lifter. I just do different lifts. Because it keeps all that in check. It's not as in check as what it was 20 years ago, but in check enough that I have to be accountable. I have to sleep. I have to do this. I have to make sure that this much nutrition is being paid attention to, or I'm not going to be able to do what I really want to do.
And I try and change that verbiage to not I have to. I get to.
Well, yes,
this is very much a privilege that we get to, and that's why I try and tell everyone follows that. I still have to do this. I still have to do that. And that's part of the problem, is we're saying we have to. Become a chore of responsibility. And I always look at it, or I try to look at it, as I get to.
Yeah.
Because I remember the scene where the doctor was like, you're never going to lift again. And wow, that gutted me. Absolutely gutted me to the point where I cursed. And he came in my room at 11:30 at night. Everybody was already gone, and I didn't know what was going on. And that was his, doctor's bedside manner. Have you tried jogging? He told me, and I lost my shit. But every day that I get to do this reminds me of that I still get to do this.
How long did it take? Because you just brought it up, and I had the same scenario after this pec was repaired. How long did it take for that voice to leave your head, of him saying that? Because it drives you for a while, right? And then for me, part of what drove me with that was the fear he was right. So then every time you go to lift something, I had to be tighter.
You know how many people tell you you're stupid when a guy with a PhD in neurology tells you need surgery and you should never lift again?
Yes. So after a while that the fear kind of fades.
I told him at that point, I will be in a meet within 6 months, and and you were wrong. And it's probably the dumbest thing I've ever said to somebody, but I was right. And I did an unsanctioned CrossFit total meet, which was squat, overhead press, and deadlift. And just to prove a point, I pulled conventional, how it hurt my back in the first place. It was the scariest fucking competition of my life. You'll actually hear my voice crack now because I still think back to that fear. My son wanted to come, and I said no, because I didn't want him to watch if I broke on the platform. And I think I squatted. Mind you, at that point, I was like just around a 585, 600 squatter. I squatted 500, missed 525 coming out of the whole high bar because I learned I can squat high bar. Overhead pressed 240, strict press. It was strict press, not push press. It was a strict press 240 overhead press coming from strongman. That was like the second highest press in the entire meet, even though there's heavyweights there. I was kind of proud of that. I was like, fuck, you fat guys can't press for shit.
Yeah.
And then I only deadlifted 550 conventional. Dropped it at the top because it was a CrossFit gym. And it was
What was the deadlift before that?
610 is what I hurt my back with
All right, so,
conventional.
okay.
It was the most terrifying moment of my life because I was either going to prove me right or him wrong. And I was right. So that's what drives me every day. So you talk about all in. That was my first all in moment. I wasn't going to let him be right or anybody else. And that's what drives me to help people, get them out of pain, improve them, work with them. Because there's someone who's telling them they can't or they won't. And the worst person who tells yourself that is yourself.
Yes.
So if I can
you believe it.
Yes. If I can change that in any way, I will go all in to do so. Which is why Stacy moved in with me, because her previous coach told her she couldn't do things. And I was like, yes, you very much can. And she also believes she can. And everything he told her she couldn't do, she's done. He told her she couldn't be a public speaker because of her accent. She gives seminars. She has a podcast. She goes everywhere. He told her she could not do things. That was part of the process and why we came up with certain mantras. Like We Did It was her thing because that was the promise. She's made this very well known, but that was her promise to her dying grandfather. That she was going to be the strongest person in the world, not really knowing what it meant at the time when she made the promise. So we was her and him. It had nothing to do with me, but her and him, we did it. So that was a mantra that was said the entire time. Done in 8 was another one because unfortunately, as confident as Stacy was, she had this belief that she couldn't make a third attempt deadlift because he told her she can't make a third attempt deadlift. So I said, then we're going to do it in 8. And I meant it. We're going to take it in 8 attempts and you're going to do it in 8 attempts and we'll be done in 8.
This was a coach of hers?
Not everyone is designed to do this or knows how to do this. He was very much, looking for the opportunity to ride her coattails, but also at the same time wasn't really what I would consider coaching her. He was just kind of, her ability exceeded his education. And
Well,
that's
in a fucked up way,
yeah.
it worked.
When I met Stacy, I already knew her previously from other meets, and we talked online briefly, just short stuff, nothing special. Hence, nothing special. I'm proud of that one too. But she followed me around the Jenn. She came down to the Jenn, which Jenn Rotsinger, who I coach, has her own meet, the Jenn, and I was there, and she followed me around for the Jenn, and every time she just asked me question after question after question. And every time I'd watch a lift, I have a horrible job of hiding my expression when somebody has a shit ugly lift. I will cringe. Everybody laughs at it. I can't hide it. And even in the judge's chair, I can't fucking hide it. I'm just like, God, learn how to fucking lift. And she's like, what did you see? What did you not like? What did you see? And then I was laughing because I text my son's mother, who is in a relationship time. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Stacy really wants my help, but she's afraid to ask for it. And she was. She was afraid to ask for my help because she thought I would say no, because she felt like she wasn't worthy at that time of that type of coaching, that type of skill, because her previous coach had kind of broken her down into what she could and couldn't do, and she started to believe some of it, which is very unlike Stacy, because she's fully on like champion mindset. I will do anything I can put my mind to it. I will. I can. I can. Will. And so it was great to see that turnaround of that initial doubt to becoming her absolute strength, and that's the same feeling I had of that incredible doubt to my absolute strength. So every year I pull like some really ridiculous, stupid YOLO, heavy-ass deadlift around the anniversary of Father's Day.
Yeah.
Beltless. So it's just one of those things like, fuck you, I can.
Yeah.
And I will.
When the experience I had was they reattached the pec tendon, and, the guy comes in and is like, I've never seen a pec tendon that looks this bad. The same crap. And this is before, I think there's 2 pec reattachments that were done in Columbus in history before mine. And so he, puts it back.
Which is amazing if you know Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, I know. It's just how far back it goes too, right? But he said, this is so fucked up, right? Because he said, well, you'll never bench 400 again. And I had this conversation with him. I'm like, what exactly do you mean? Because I've benched, 540, but I didn't really know my shirt that well. And so if I get to know my shirt better, that it's not really 540, it should be like 6. maybe 6'10". Then my triceps aren't that strong, so it really should be like 650. So if you're saying 400, do you really mean like 550? Because so I'm actually having this conversation, with this guy, and he's obviously, he doesn't know gear, he doesn't know any of this shit. He just thinks it's all, raw, whatever it was. And I mean, it pissed me off, right? For one thing, and then I'm trying to negotiate. Because like, where's 400 come from? Like, why not 20 pounds, 40 pounds? Like, where the fuck does 400 come from?
Especially when they tell you what they tack it in there is stronger than anything you could possibly have in your own. You're like, shit, I'm gonna bench 6.
This makes no sense, And then because of the nature of what that injury was, there's a lot of scar tissue that kind of tears off, and so I'm running back every 3 months. Like, oh shit, did I tear it again? It's like no, and then it's after a while it was. Figuring out that, because it drove me, because it's like, fuck you, this isn't going to be the case or whatever it's going to be. And, but it took me a while, to get, because every time I'd start to get back, because I came back really, really slow from that, not what Louis wanted, really, not how I actually did it at every injury after that either, so I did everything compliant, which imagine how slow that is. Everything compliant to what a doctor and a physical therapist back then would say, like super fucked up. And then, so then it finally, goes away. And then I lost the fear, because the fear got to the point to where when I get the bar down, it's like, I just want this motherfucker off my chest as fast as I can. Because I don't want anything back, because mine tore at the top. It didn't tear on the way down. It tore at lockout. And, which, so I would visualize the bar popping, hitting my head, blood splattering everywhere, the ambulance after. I would put myself in that fear state to be able to press things faster. And then when it finally went away, and it was a follow-up, or no, it wasn't even a follow-up. I saw the guy at some other function years later and was telling him, look, now I should be the guy you hang on your wall. You know what I'm saying? And he first off, he kind of remembered, didn't really know, and we talked for a little while afterwards, and he's like, you misunderstood, what I'm saying. He says, there's no ill intent here at all. My goal wasn't for you to get mad. My goal was for you to not get hurt again, and to live, and be able to train for as long as you can be able to train. But, this probably isn't what you, on a risk benefit ratio, this is not really where you're going to want to go. But so I wasn't like being evil. Like, so none of these, it took me 20 years, to figure out that none of these doctors are actually doing their intent.
They're giving you the safest advice possible.
They're giving you the best advice they think that you can. And there was a bigger disconnect back then than there is now. Where now I think they understand a little bit more, or at least they understand, as we would if we were working with somebody that tore something off, right? You kind of know, here's what they should do, here's what they're gonna do. So we got to go out and find a middle ground. Right? Because you can't tell them what they should do.
No, and they don't know you. And like you said, they don't mean ill intent when a doctor's advising against it. They're giving you the safest possible. Do no harm is their creed. Do no harm. I don't want to advise you that you should go try and bench 500 just because you can. I want you to know that you probably live a better life if you don't. And, jokingly, that was a very impactful moment for you, and it was a super impactful moment for me. And while we were remembering this for years on end and using spite and anger to fuel us, for us, it was this impactful moment. For them, it was just Tuesday. They don't, like you said, he barely recognized you.
And I mean, and I'm grateful for it, because without it, there's a lot of, I would have approached things, differently, and because of all that now, I mean, every injury I had after that was major was approached differently. It's like, okay, here's this. I need to find a physical therapist that I can speak to that's off the record, so they don't have to worry about getting sued or whatever if I get hurt. Like, let's just talk. Like, what if I did this?
All you need is self-belief.
Yes.
I've had multiple athletes come to me after significant injuries because of my injury history who just wanted my guidance to get back on the platform. Dave Osborne, I believe you know who Dave Osborne is out, and he's one who came to me. He tore his quad at Nationals. He's like, hey, I just tore my quad. I want to get back on the platform. what do we do? And so we started from like fundamentals, and we started from tissue capacity, and I had him doing banded step downs. So we looped the band and just having him like, can you extend your knee? Cool. I'm like, good. We have some quad there. Let's build upon it. And, you know, he ended up PRing at his next meet, his squat. Joe, I'm drawing a blank on Joe's last name in Colorado. He owns Spartan Barbell. Same thing. He had torn his quad, and he came to me because he tore his quad and wanted to get back on the platform. Same thing. Built up slowly and worked on the work capacity, but we worked more on structural integrity. So the reason why those muscles go isn't just fatigue, it's poor structural integrity. So if we're asking our prime movers to be more than prime movers, and we're also asking them to be prime stabilizers, they're going to go. We're asking too much of them. And that's why I like the split stance work or single leg work or core work, is because I want the prime stabilizers to be strong and I want the prime movers to be strong, but I don't want either other to try to do the job of the other one. And that's where people get lost. So like I bring up Stacy, that was how she originally lifted. Her low back is mule strong. And the way she was lifting, the mechanics was never taught certain mechanics. She just loaded her low back, and her low back, which should be a prime stabilizer, was becoming the prime mover. And she was chronically living in pain. And she told me, I'm in pain. One of the first conversations we had, she talked about shoulder pain. And we're sitting at dinner after the Jen meet, and I'm like, can you raise your right arm up? And she goes, yeah. And she turns her whole body like Michael Keaton in the first Batman in the rubber suit. She turns like this, and she goes like that. I'm like, Stacy, the answer is fucking no. Yeah. You can't lift your arm up above your head. I'm like, we're going to work on that. Your lats are a little tight, your pecs are tight. Her body was finding compensations, as their body was, as my body did, finding compensations around either poor mechanics or poor exercise selection or poor fatigue management. At the time, I didn't have a bedtime. I didn't sleep very well. I was super duper stressed. I had all kinds of problems. I shouldn't have expected anything but an injury. I was being overly ambitious at the busiest time of my life, and something's got to give, and it was me. And that was the back injury. The same thing happened with the adductor. I had just moved away from my family. I was separating, and I was using a meet as an excuse not to focus on the shit I was going through. And I was going all in on this meet, and I was stronger than ever. But 2 weeks after the meet, when I went to take my heaviest squat, my adductor ripped right off the bone because something had to give.
2 weeks after the meet?
2 weeks before the
Okay.
It was my last heavy squat.
That was just going to become even more stupid.
Yeah, that was my last heavy squat, and it was supposed to be the 699 that flew up on like 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
And that's when, as I'm going down, it felt like white hot smoke in my leg, and you just hear this cracking celery sounds. Oh, it's fucking atrocious. The whole thing went. Sartorius is gone, and the adductor magnus is gone. And, you know, I had to learn to lift around it. But again, that was my fault. I was using training as therapy, and training is not therapy. Training is something I get to do. It's to be something I look forward to, not something I hide in. And that overwhelming emotional stress is what caused the physical breakdown. And that's why it's important to understand your sleep schedule, your food schedule, your hydration schedule, because that's how you minimize the stress.
Yeah.
Training is also a stress, and your body doesn't differentiate between what it considers good or bad stress. It just has a stress threshold. And when you hit that threshold is when the top blows off.
Yeah.
You know, like a car redlining.
Yeah. I'm going to push back a little bit on the training as therapy, but I'll give a little more context too.
It's cathartic.
Well, any therapy that becomes dependent is no longer therapy, right? So if you have a therapist that you become dependent on, is no longer an effective therapist.
Right.
But where I push back on that a little bit is, how can clay be therapy? How can a dog be therapy? How can all these other things be therapy, but training can't? How can training be therapy?
There's a scientific answer to that. It's the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you're working on pottery, provided it doesn't fall apart and frustrate you, or you're doing art paintings and you're listening to music, if it's putting you into a relaxed state, it's putting you into parasympathetic. It is lowering your cortisol level. It is therapeutic to your body. It is recovery. It's a form of active recovery. If you're training, there's no way you can train in the parasympathetic nervous system and lift heavy weights. You're going into your sympathetic nervous system. You're spitting out cortisol. You're spitting out norepinephrine and epinephrine, and your adrenaline spitting through. That is a stress. They're both, it can be a stressor, but one is putting you in parasympathetic. The whole point of like laying on the floor with your feet up, with Dr. John Rossin, that nasal breathing and 10 minutes of relaxation is to try and bring yourself back into parasympathetic. That's recovery. So it is therapeutic to the body, but it's not necessarily therapy. So a lot of times when people are overly stressed or agitated, if you can get them in a therapeutic state, they're going to lower their stress hormones.
But if my therapist is getting me activated and upset, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Then that's therapy.
Well, sometimes they have to be a little confrontational to get you to acknowledge these faults and work on them. It's not always comfortable, therapy. Therapy is not always comfortable. I've been going through it for a year. It's not always comfortable.
Not, like I said, I'm not completely disagreeing, but a lot of people will say go exercise because it will help.
Yes.
You know, and it will.
It does release dopamine.
Right.
It's
So
the happy hormone.
Yeah. So we're talking exercise. Yeah. Right. So we're not talking like
exercise. Yes. Training. Right? No.
Yeah. So I should have put that context.
Training is for a purpose. Exercise is for your health. Go for a fucking walk.
Yes. So that will put us on the same page with that. With that's kind of full circle with all these different educational paths that you've gone through,
Yes.
right? So with all that being covered and decades, of mastery and process, what now, as you're working with your clients, are you seeing being the biggest, I don't want to say mistakes, missteps, because mistakes means that, it's
Sure.
wrong, but there's with
Lifestyle.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I was going to
lifestyle.
say, with about every 5 years, things change a little.
If you're at the top end of this sport, you're treating it like you're a competition, like it's a competition, which it is, and you're treating it like you're an athlete, you start having different behaviors and different lifestyle. I know you had John on here and he talked about not drinking near meat, John Hack. He says, I don't drink near meat, I don't do things. He makes a living from this, so he treats it like it's a priority. 9 out of 10 powerlifters are hobbyists. They don't want to give up their weekend drinking. They don't want to give up their late night partying. They don't want to give up their chicken wings, because it's a hobby. And it's like, well, that's the difference between what you're giving up to be top 5 and what you're keeping in there to be middle of the pack.
Yeah.
That's the difference maker is a lot of people are capable. Not everybody's willing. And that's lifestyle. Lifestyle is what's going to dictate your results, not your program, not your coach, not your gym, not your bar, not your shoes. You're going to get as much out of this as you give yourself in your lifestyle. I'm sorry, I'm gonna pick on Joe Jordan for a second. Mianna laughs at there's only a 5-year difference in age between myself and Joe Jordan. We're both in Florida. He's at Perfect Storm, so he's like 2 hours north of me. And she's like, how are you guys 5 years apart? I'm like, I guarantee you we've lived very different lifestyles. So, Joe Jordan has been like grade Santa as long as I've known him for 10 years. He's looked like that.
But he hasn't aged after.
No, yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
He got healthier now.
Yeah.
Like you said, you get to the point where you realize you have to, or you get to, but he realized at a certain point, like it hits you after the effect. So I've lived a relatively healthy lifestyle most of my life. I've never been like a blaster as far as gear use and whatnot. I'm minimal amounts, and I don't drink except for meat deadlifts. Jordan Jarrell got me hooked on drinking before deadlifts, and now it's the only time I ever actually drink. I don't drink at all. The XPC you were at with Stacy a couple years ago, 3.5 years ago, I think it was like the first time in 4 years I had a drink. We celebrated afterwards. It was like 4 years. First time in 4 years I had a drink. Like I don't do that. Not because I don't want to. Like I'd like to go out and have fun, but to me it's like, what's this taking away from? Which means more to me.
Yeah.
And because I was almost taken away from me, this means the world to me. So I do things that are necessary to be as functional and as optimal as I can, to a degree that some people don't always understand that, but that's what's important to me.
Yeah, a funny Joe Jordan story, and I'm gonna screw the age up, right? But 5 years ago, whenever it was, so I'm screwing that up already. When he squatted 900, I'm probably screwing that up too. So it was a big weight, and we made a post, or somebody made a post that said like 74-year-old. It was old, right?
I remember that.
Right, squats 900.
And people believed it.
Everybody believed it, right? I mean, I'll tell you, people believed it that should have known better. I mean, they were messaging me like, man, I didn't know Joe was that old. And it's like 30 years off what he was at the time, which was funny.
Joe is my spirit animal. Like I have the absolute admiration for him because it doesn't matter what happens to him physically, he never wavers mentally. He will find a way to get under the fucking bar. He's like the Terminator. He's powerlifting's version of the Terminator. He's going to keep coming and coming and coming, and I fucking love that about him.
Yeah.
And it's just so great to watch. I tell him all the time, like, I admire you so much. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because you fucking won't quit. And that's the difference maker between 1% and 99% is the 1% won't fucking quit. And Joe's got that.
Yeah. Well, he loves it too, at a level that very few ever are going to.
He just did a raw meet.
He just did a raw meet, right? I'm saying,
and he survived. I'm like, stay raw. He's like, can't wait to get back in gear.
Yeah. Well, he did. First off, he did it, right?
Yeah.
So he dropped his ego to be able to do it, which most are never going to do that. So then he did it, and it's probably a good thing, right? Because it's going to allow his joints to rest a little bit. And he did okay. I mean, fuck, for a 74-year-old, he did really good.
For a 74-year-old, he fucking knocked out of the park. It's probably an all-time world record.
Yeah, exactly. So with the lifestyle, if you have an intake form and you have a form that you're sending out to your clients as they come in, do you have a form that you're sending out that says, here's lifestyle factors that you should take into consideration?
I know most coaches. Not most coaches. I know many coaches that do, like Riley does that. And I try not to step over that boundary because I'm not qualified to be their life coach.
Yeah.
I don't have the degree in psychology she has, so I try not to step over those bounds of doing those things. And sometimes it can come across as just being crass when you feel like you're being judged, especially since, I'll have like female clients and I don't want to judge them for their lifestyle or what they do. I just want to help them lift as best as possible. I will always encourage it, but I never go out of my way to find out someone's lifestyle or life
Well, I'm defining,
preferences.
sleep and hydration
Yes.
and nutrition as part of his lifestyle.
I will ask them as I get to know them.
Okay.
So it's not in my opening questionnaire, but as I get to know them, if they're having a bad day or things going on, like first thing I'll ask is, how did you sleep last night?
Yeah.
How's nutrition been? How have you been with water? And usually you'll start to like, well, I could probably do better. I'm like, okay, let's start setting a goal of, a gallon a day, or let's start getting a goal of I'm in bed by this time and I'm up by this time. Let's add in 2 10-minute walks a day so you can work on circulation, things like that, and recovery and digestion, whatever. So I will usually do that as I get to know them. Like the first 6 weeks you're working with someone, you're not changing them in any way. You're just getting to know them. And you're testing them to see where they're at with communication, with recovery ability, with adaptation, and then you're building upon there. So that's why I don't take short-term clients. Like people reach out like, hey, can you work with me for 6 weeks? No. I'm still learning you the first 6 weeks. And if I want to guide you the best, I have to learn you. So I'm not just going to give you an arbitrary, here's 6 weeks. And plus, I don't want to be their scapegoat. Oftentimes, people will reach out to you like 7 weeks before a meet, like, hey, I'm 7 weeks out, and I don't want to put myself in this meet. Can you guide me through? I'm like, no. I don't know what the fuck you've done or what you haven't been doing, and all of a sudden you're gonna be like, I'm the scapegoat.
Yeah.
I had a bad meet because I worked with him. Like, you chose to fuck off for 8 weeks. It's not my problem. So I won't take anyone that's short term off the bat unless I've already worked with them previously and I know them. Like Gabriel's coming back 10 weeks before the Ghost Clash. I worked with him multiple times now, 2 and 3 times for different meets, so we know what works, what doesn't work, and he just wants to make sure he's safely dialed into the meet, so I'm cool with that. But I won't take short-term clients. I don't ask them off the bat what their lifestyle questionnaire is, because what's going to happen is most people aren't going to be honest with that anyways. They're not going to tell you what their faults are. You're going to kind of learn to get that communication and trust within them as you go on, and they'll be able to identify these things and tell you more about themselves as they go.
Did you work as a personal trainer before online?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say that's exactly how I worked as a personal trainer, and most of us
Personal
did.
trainer, fitness manager at 24 Hour Fitness, and then opened my own gym and studio in 2005.
Yeah. Well, it's when I started, I found out real quick, you can't develop a year program for a client that may only stay a month.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't, you have to feel them out as they're feeling you out. You got to see what the compliance is. It's a process.
Sure.
And so it makes sense that same thing would carry over.
Yeah,
with what you're
coming
doing
in.
now.
They'll see you twice a week, and then you're encouraging them to train 4 days a week, and you're giving them 2 things to do on the other days, and you're going to see if they show up or not. And if they don't, then you're going to make those 2 hours that you have them for a week the most efficient as possible. And that's also where a lot of learning how to cue individuals, unlike an athlete, comes from, because when you're dealing with any type of general person who has no idea what training is or what these muscle groups are, you have to make them understand what you're trying to get them to do. So that's where simplification of cues comes in from.
Yeah.
Now, granted, some of the cues I've used are rather ridiculous, but they're memorable.
With your programming and your philosophy, how would you, let's just say with a squat, how would you define a weak point? I'm making it a broad stroke, because some people are going to say, if they miss 3/4 up, that's a weak point. Some people are going to say it's their shoulders, it's their triceps, whatever it's going to be. Everybody's going to define a weak point based upon how they globally see the lift.
Sure.
So are you looking at bar path? Are you looking at muscle groups? Are you looking at structural integrity? What are you looking at as far as?
So we're taking a squat, and you're going to look at it. Did the bar go straight up and down?
Yes.
If the bar went straight up and down, then it's probably muscular weakness somewhere else if they were managed to go straight up and down. If you start seeing that bar travel forwards or backwards, or their body angling different ways, there's an energy leakage somewhere. Let's watch another rep and see where they lost it.
Yes.
Sometimes they don't know how to root their feet, so they're not stable from the floor. Sometimes they're overextending their lumbar, so they have no bracing ability and they have no trunk underneath them. Sometimes they're just really immobile in the shoulders and they push the bar forward. When you see that, I love that. The bar rolled up my neck. How does a 400-pound bar roll upwards against gravity? You pushed it up your neck because you internally rotated your shoulders, and that's the direction the bar went. But people will say stupid shit like that. And that's what you're looking for. So the first thing you're looking at from a squat is, does the bar go straight up and down? Because if you're literally just bending your knees and hips, that's what's going to happen. It's pretty much going to go almost vertically straight up and down.
Yeah.
Some variants, yes, they're not, perfect. But if it's doing anything beyond straight up and down, why? And then identify why. Was it, poor rooting? Was it poor bracing? Was it poor mobility? And then you start attacking those things from there.
All right, now let's say all that's in check, right? Where, I agree 100%. There might be some deviation on the way down, but on the way up, pretty much should be straight. And if everything's solid, and then it's on that way up, and then it stalls in whatever area, so out of the bottom, midpoint.
Stalls out of the bottom, it's going to be adductor magnus and quad strength. Stalls halfway up, it's hip extension strength or the inability to hold position. End of the day, the best advice I've ever gotten was from Heath Allison. He's like, you'd miss a strongman lift or miss an event. He's like, why did I miss that? He goes, just get stronger.
Yeah.
You weren't strong enough to hold the position. So something needs to get stronger. You're identifying what needs to get stronger and make it fucking stronger. So that it's under the same rules of progressive overload. If you're identifying a weak link or a weak area, then you load it progressively over time and get better at it. Maybe add more of your volume towards that weakness. Instead of, if you have really, really strong quads, continuing to hammer the quads isn't going to get you any stronger if you have really weak core. So maybe you have the quad volume a little bit and double the core volume a little bit, so you get stronger at what your weakest link was, and then you can meet them in the middle over time if you're seeing progress. You're testing.
So say they're weak out of the bottom, right? Then how do you change your program to address that?
Depends upon what made them weak out of the bottom. So if they're weak out of the bottom because they weren't rooting their feet, that's what we're going to work on. If they're
Well,
weak,
not technical, right?
Okay.
Everything's solid.
everything's solid,
Everything's
and they're
solid.
weak out of the bottom, they
Yeah.
they have weak quads.
Okay. So then do you add more quad work
You're not
in?
going to see someone, though, who's technically sound
I know.
get stuck in the bottom.
I know.
Because what you're going to see is if they're technically sound but they have weak quads, their hips are going to shoot back behind them because they're going to try and lift up with their low back because their quads weren't strong enough to extend the knees.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's hard to say that they're technically sound and they're still feeling at the bottom, because if they're technically sound and they're feeling at the bottom, then they just need to get stronger quads.
Yes.
But usually you'll see a deviation of some kind.
Yes. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's certain things that are technically issues that you
Sure.
can cue technically to fix, or mobility technically to fix. And then, yes, when it gets heavy and it breaks down, something's going to go wrong technically after it falls.
Every seminar I do, I make people unrack and squat the bar, and I make people unrack and bench the bar, and then I have them deadlift, 155, 225, whatever it is, just as a little bit of load because we need it off the floor. And I always tell people, if you can't move the empty bar with skill, the demonstration of skill and mastery of skill, then you're going to break down that much more as you add more weight to it.
Oh, of course.
Because everyone's like, well, it's just the bar, I need weight to get down. Like, well, okay, cool. You just told me you have a mobility issue or a bracing issue. You don't need weight to get down. If weight's forcing you down, you're in a dangerous spot. You can't get there on your own. So that's usually what we do. And like you mentioned, okay, so for example, you just said someone's technically sound, but they're getting stuck on the bottom. So their squat mechanics might be technically sound. How did they unrack the bar? How did they walk out?
Yeah.
How did they set up? Because success is 100% in the setup. And I've seen that where people don't know how to support a bar or rack a bar. They know how to sit down and up. They know how to squat, but they don't know how to hold the fucking bar.
Yeah.
And that's where the bar starts to move on them. And that's the number one cue you hear as soon as somebody walks out: settle.
Yeah, yeah.
Be specific.
Well, I think that's in all the years of me doing this shit, in the squat, that's the biggest mistake. Is either their walkout sucks because they don't practice it, which blows my mind, by the way.
We shot that clip earlier.
Because you do this with every fucking rep, every set that you do, but you only going to focus on it on the last one.
It used to blow my mind, but then I realized nobody was ever taught, because that's the first thing Stacy wanted to learn. Because she used to get derogatory comments under her posts when she would show her squat about how ugly her unrack was and her walkout was, because she was training at home in South Carolina in a rack, and they would wobble and people were like, oh, you're squatting in an earthquake, or they'd make asshole comments. And so when we started talking about working, she's like, you know what the first thing I want you to teach me is? She's like, how to walk out a squat. Nobody had ever showed her.
Yeah.
And who was going to have the courage to walk up to an all-time world record holder and say, let me teach you how to unrack and walk out a bar?
Yeah.
I'm the asshole who does, but yeah, it's one of those things. It shows you how valuable the fundamental is, because her squat went nowhere but up when she got stronger quad, stronger core, and better mechanics.
Yeah.
It went up, but she was already the number one in the world. You know how hard it is to make someone who's number one in the world better?
Oh yeah.
What's really hard
Well, when
about
it's a mess, though.
what's really hard about it is having the athlete have the vulnerability to say, I know I need technical help, because nobody had ever taught her. She was just strong, so they just gave her programming and said, just go fucking lift it, because she could. But there were glaring holes that held her back, and she knew it, and she was courageous enough to say, hey, can you help me with the fundamentals? Now she's got them down, she teaches people, but back then, nobody had ever taught her how.
Yeah.
Some of that was because she was a female, and she was a strong girl, and she was a lesbian in the gym. They didn't want to approach that. But also some of it's like, if I have a lifter, I don't care how strong you are. If I see a glaring flaw, I'm going to tell you what it is so I can help you get better.
You see, I was fortunate because I was taught from the very start, that you're going to finish how you start.
Yep.
So if it's a bench, you take it out, you hold it, you let it settle.
Yep.
This is with fucking 185 or whatever it was when I was starting, not a whole lot. Same with the squat, and a walkout, I had to walk out before a monolift, by the way. I was around before there were monoliths.
I make everyone at seminars, even if they're like, oh, I use a mono, I'm like, I don't care, you're going to learn how to walk out. Because at some point in time, you're going to have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and know how to do it in short steps. It's like, and it blows my mind because I don't know how dated you are and all this stuff, but the racks I had to walk out with when I started were fucking tires at the bottom of the jack stand. So there's a stand and there's a tire. So you couldn't just step. You had to like step. You had to clear the fucking tire before you could even get in your stance, because the tires only left this much room.
They were the weightlifting racks that were freestanding that they needed to weigh down.
Well, they had actual tires on them.
And that's where Hatfield got away with, it became known as the Hatfield rule, where he says, I'm going to stand up with this and I'm not going to walk it out. Move the fucking rack.
Yeah, so the jacks got better. I mean, they definitely got better. Now the jacks are so freaking good. I mean, we make and sell them. They're so good. You can have a one-step walkout if you really master it. So it's a different
You only have to clear
territory.
it 2 inches now.
Oh, the rule says you have to clear it by 2 inches?
No.
Okay,
If you're in a combo rack, it's only 2 inches.
Oh, yeah.
If you can clear that 2 inches, you're fine. The problem is if you have shitty mechanics and you go forward, you're still going to hit the rack. But you literally only have to clear it by 2 inches and be safe.
Yeah, which is great, by the way.
Yes.
But it's also just like 2 inches away from being a monolith.
I'll get pushback from people, and they're like, why do I have to learn this? And I was like, well, you told me you want to be great. You told me you want to be stronger. And I'm like, if you go to a meet and you watch people walk out sloppy and the bar starts helicoptering and moving and they're wavering, how much energy do you think they're expending by holding their top end weight on their back that long and wrestling with it before they have to squat? And you get like crickets. You're like, oh, okay.
Well, I mean, you got to get half your air before you get it out, because you're not going to, you can't reset all your air.
I will fully brace to pick and unrack.
Yeah.
And to be comfortable enough to re-brace and breathe again after I walk out, or even in a mono, I'll still do it, because the more I brace, the lighter that bar feels as I unrack it. And the lighter it feels, the more confidence I just got.
Now the same thing on the bench as well. You take it out, you got to hold.
Yep.
Let your shoulder blades depress. Let everything compact into that. There's a pad for a reason. You should let the pad.
Especially raw.
Yeah, fucking gear too. Because a lot of the gear will hold it off of you. You got to, let it come back in, but same thing. It's now what you do after that's going to be different if it's gear or raw.
Yeah.
Where you're going to take it's going to be vastly different, even though some people will say it's the same, they're wrong. But anyhow,
if you've got a really big belly and you can use the multiply mechanics and you're 400 pounds, go for it.
That's still, man, you need strong fucking shoulders.
That's one of the coolest studies out there, the Alabama study. Are you familiar with this, the Alabama study? It's the one that had Bill Kazmaier in it.
I believe so, but run it through me again.
So most raw mechanics are taught to press in a J pattern of up and slightly back in the J hook pattern. And of course, Louis was a big fan of the Pacifico style of straight up tricep driven. Yeah. Which if you're in gear makes a shit ton of sense, because it's going to drive off the bottom anyways from the shirt, and then you're just going to have to lock out your triceps. That's where the board work comes in. Most studies nowadays are done with what they consider well-trained individuals, which means nothing to you and me. Well-trained to them is someone who consistently goes to the gym 3 or more days a week for over a year and a half. Sometimes it's sometimes it's like they can squat their own body weight, stupid shit. It's not what I would consider a well-trained powerlifter. The Alabama study has like 12 of the time frames, like all-time best powerlifters. It's a smaller pool there, and they were the ones who tend to press back in that J hook of up and back for the raw lifter. I love that study. I also love the Eastern Bloc studies because they're used with Olympians and Olympic athletes and gold medalists. They're not used with your college kid who's just looking for free extra credit from his, from his physiology class.
Yeah.
Who just got drunk the night before, who might skew your numbers a little bit. Those aren't, irrelevant. They're still great studies. They give you an outline, but they're not set in stone. People will try to go by them like, well, the study shows, like, that's one study. When you've been doing this for 20 years, you realize that study's going to change every 5 years. It's the same concept, different result. Like we were talking about that one study where they didn't change the load, they just changed the time under tension. Well, of course, the details matter. I love the studies that involve the higher level athletes, but they're hard to come by. There's another, but that's the one that shows the mechanic difference between raw and shirted was the J press pattern, and it has very elite level bench pressers, very elite level powerlifters from the time who were involved in this study, which is rare now.
Yeah.
Most powerlifters don't want to deviate from their program. I got called by the FAU lab when I still lived in Coral Springs, which is just south of Boca. And they wanted me to come in. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, we want you to take a max squat and then a max rep squat on Tuesday. I'm like, well, I got deadlifts on Wednesday, so I'm out.
Yeah.
Thanks, though.
It still is going to have variance, right? Because there's, I know geared lifters that it would look like a J, right?
Yes.
But essentially what they're doing is they're pressing the bar back this way towards the rack, right?
In the direction of their arch.
Well, and they're they're flaring as it's going back this way. So essentially, the bar's not going up; it's just going this way. Then they flare up underneath it, kind of like a Bill Crawford thing. If you go way back into that, and it's a skill. It's a different thing, right? And so there's gear changes things, and doesn't have to change. So that was where Louis had big issues with this, by the way, right? Because that's not the straight line,
right?
You know, where, you know, if you can ride gravity, like the bar doesn't have to go up, but all you're doing is kind of contorting yourself under it, then
it's leverage.
There's leverage, exactly. So there's what's right, what's wrong. It's whatever the fuck you press the most doing.
Yep.
You know, whatever's not going
end
to
of the day, whatever moves your total highest is the fucking form you should use.
Exactly. And, you know, arm length, all these different things are going to play into that. It's just, and this is where I think coaching really, really comes in. Like you said earlier, if you're to meet, there's things you cringe at. You know, I do the same thing. You can just see like, oh shit, that ain't good. No. And it may be textbook good, but you're looking at it like, no, that ain't good. Yeah. You're like, their shoulders are getting wrecked right now.
Or all their buddies on their Instagram posts like perfect form. I was like, what the fuck are you watching?
Yeah, it's like this is just fucked up. And then there's other things that I've seen that I would say is fucked up. But then I'm looking at the bar path and I'm like,
but it's effective.
It's a really good fucking bar path. Like it's really like.
But that's why you don't mimic someone's form. You find yours.
Yes.
Because it works for them doesn't mean it's going to work for you, or doesn't mean you should. It just means they found a way that works for them. Yeah. And that's the thing of individual differences. Like that's why I don't love. I don't mean to hate on Mark Ripito, but he's one of those who pontificates this is the best way to squat. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, for you, and for people who were in single ply back in your day. But the raw lifter doesn't squat that way very, very well or very, very effectively. So how is it the best way? It's just probably your way that you like to teach that you know, and it's been effective for you, so you have a bias for it. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make it the best way. Because if you look at 9 out of 10 raw lifters, they don't squat that way anymore.
Yeah, I think the key word there is you have a bias for it.
Yes.
Like we all do.
Yeah, sure.
But you need to know what it is.
Yeah.
Because you have to question. I believe you have to question that, right? Especially over time. You know, because as I said before, other generations are learning from the generations before them, as they should.
When I was learning weightlifting, I learned how to hook grip. Mm-hmm. And upon hook gripping, I realized I caused no torsion to my lumbosacral area. It's caused no pain or no signal loss in my left leg. If I mix grip anything above 600 pounds now, I will get a loss of sensation for a couple of days on my left leg. So someone suggested to me, like, why don't you hook grip your deadlifts? This is 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. And back then, there was only one person really doing it. It was Steve Goggins.
Yeah.
And so for 5 years, you're fucking crazy. You hook grip your deadlifts. What does that do to your thumbs? I don't know if the camera's gonna see this. My thumbs are black and blue and calloused, and they will be for the entirety of my life. They have been for 11 years now. And now it is the most mechanically efficient form used in sumo deadlifts is for everyone to hook grip, because Kaler, who set the all-time world record, hook gripped his deadlifts. So now it's like, hook grip must be the way. So everyone wants to try hook grip. Like,
everybody does it.
Everybody does it, especially for sumo. It's one of those things like, hey, try it. If you like it and you find it helpful, use it. If you find mixed grip to be better and tighter, use it. So I'll give you an example, like Chris Bridgeford for his sumo, he was better mixed grip. For his conventional, he was better hook grip. It was more like a strap for him. But every time he'd go to hook grip his sumo deadlift, he'd end up with a drop or off balance or change. We ended up changing how he hook grips a year ago, which helped. But at the time, he couldn't hook grip at the same efficiency for sumo as he could with conventional. So it was like, okay, for conventional, we'll use hook. For sumo, we'll use mixed. And that worked really, really well through competition. So it's one of those things where there is nothing that's best or better. Yeah. I fucking love sumo hook grip, but that doesn't mean I'm going to make you do it. Yeah. It's just what helps me. It's what allows me to still do this, so I'm going to fucking love it. You know, people are like, well, your thumbs look like shit. I'm like, they feel like shit too, but you know what doesn't hurt? My back.
Here's one of the funny things that I use to fuck with my multiply friends, right? So, you know, because it's less now than it was 10 years ago, the raw multiply crap that we used to go, but probably 15 years ago. To me, it hasn't been bad in the last 8 years, but I don't pay attention to the whole thing. But if one of the multiply guys I know starts, you know, going on that shit, like, oh, they don't have pain tolerance or whatever it's going to be, then I'll say, how do you deadlift? Right, and I just follow. You see where I'm going, right? Right, and they'll tell me. I'm like, you ever try hooker? No, that hurts like a motherfucker.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're not wrong, and he's not wrong. You know, I will take an 800-pound deadlift in a hook grip any day. I don't care. My hands rip every meet. I don't give a fuck. But if you put 800 pounds on my back, I'm gonna cry like a little bitch. Like I had an 800-pound yoke on my back once, and it fucking hurt. I was like, I'm never doing single multiply. I mean, it's just a matter of where.
Yeah, this is just powerlifting gym fuck around.
And what you can condition yourself to.
Yeah. With the hydration, we kind of missed that aspect a little bit. So with your clients, where do you start them at? Because that's a huge one that I think that I know I didn't pay attention to when I was powerlifting at all.
Some of the content videos I put up were talking about hydration, and Dave's giving me this wonderful Fiji water here. If you look over the side, I walked in here knowing he was going to give me shit. I still walked in here with a gallon of water that has electrolytes in it. You know, like I will never be dehydrated again. I lost part of my medial left hamstring in a super total meet because by the time I got to my third deadlift, I had been out of water for 3 hours. I was too dumb and arrogant to ask somebody for some.
Yeah.
So I did a super total meet, which was weightlifting and powerlifting in the same day. Yeah, I'm that crazy. And by my third deadlift, I went to pull 730, and halfway up, I thought somebody shot me in the knee.
Yeah.
In the medial side of my right knee, it felt like a gunshot, and it turns out I tore the medial side of my hamstring because I was dehydrated, because I hadn't had water in 3 hours at that point, because I only brought 1 gallon with me, and the meet started. I was down there. I drove down there at 6 a.m. The meet started at like 8 a.m., but I had to weigh in 2 hours before for the weightlifting. And by the time it tore, it was 8:30 at night, and I'd been out since like 5. And it was a CrossFit gym in the middle of like a CrossFit Soul in like the middle of nowhere in South Miami. There was nothing around, no stores or anything. So I just went without water, and then pop. And that was from dehydration at that point, because I was stimmed out of my mind.
Well, that's another thing that creates that
Learn the hard way
thing, right?
Yeah, I learned the hard way, and it's also a reminder. Anytime I do pretty extreme weight cuts and I drop a significant amount of water, the first thing I feel is my vertebral discs. They hurt like a motherfucker because there's no longer any cushion for there. So water is your cushion for your vertebral discs. Water is the fuel that brings all the blood flow to your body and to your muscles. And as little as 2% dehydration can cause as much as a 14% strength loss. So you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not hydrating. I don't necessarily have a starting point in saying, I'm just always going to remind them to make sure they always have water with you. Because when someone says, I had a shit day, I haven't eaten or drinking anything all day, that's your fucking fault. And I'll be the first one to tell them that's your fucking fault. You knew where you were going, and it's not hard to carry a bottle of water with you. It's the cheapest thing you can use with the highest return on supplementation is water and sodium.
Yeah, and I would go, that's what I was going to say, I was going to go a little bit further and say that, if you're sweating a lot and if training hard, then sodium, definitely sodium, potassium, actually Element, right?
There you go.
Which is a sponsor of the podcast, drinkelement.com/table talk. That doesn't have sugar in it, right? So that, I don't want to have sugar in the shit that I'm drinking while training unless
it's a long duration or outdoor.
Right? So it's a different thing where when I was training with Meadows, and it was all bodybuilding, high
intracarbs.
We had
highly
there's
branched
no
cyclodextrins.
way. There was absolutely no way to do that.
He mentioned getting that from Milo Sarshev, the bodybuilder, was having like applesauce during his workouts.
Yeah.
Because it was like a mix, it was like sugar-filled applesauce. It was like a mix of like dextrose and fructose, so fast recovery, bigger pumps, and the whole nine. And I've tried that, not the applesauce, but I've tried highly branched cyclodextrins. I've tried, Gatorade powders, or what's the one that's from like potatoes? I don't remember what the hell it is. But nonetheless, I've tried it, and your endurance capacity goes way up, even for powerlifting, because you never feel depleted or flat. No matter how much work you do, you're constantly recycling that ATP and running through. So if you have like creatine and carbs in there, it's going to help you. But the base should be the sodium, potassium, and the water. It doesn't matter how much carbs you have if you don't hydrate, because there's nothing to transport them to the muscle anyways.
Yeah, well, most powerlifters in general are not going to be carb depleted. They're just they're fucking up in the other area.
We powerlift because we don't have the discipline to be bodybuilding.
Well, yeah, and it's that brings up an interesting. That brings up a topic here to go down too, though, is if their carbs are high, right? Because protein is carb sparing, or vice versa, right? Then talk a little bit about that, because a lot of the lifters, and I'm sure your clients, are going to see different protein requirements, and some of them are fucking insane, by the way.
Yeah.
2 grams per pound or whatever.
It's shown to be unnecessary.
It's like ridiculous, right? But a lot of that's dependent upon how much carbs are in your system.
Correct.
Too.
The only time 2 grams of protein, to my knowledge, that has been beneficial above, like 1 gram per pound of protein, which actually it's slightly less. We use 1 gram to make sure we're at adequate levels. It's really like 0.88 per pound or some shit like that. But you use 1 gram to just make sure you're at adequate levels. But
isn't that per pound of lean body mass too?
Depends on how much body fat somebody has. If somebody has significant body fat levels, yes. If somebody is very, very lean, it could be a little bit more towards the upside. They can because they exercise, low body fat.
Yeah.
But Jose Antonio did a study that showed 2 grams to be more effective than 1 gram, but it was a low carb study. So they were not taking in significant, they're taking in less than like 100 grams a day of carbohydrates. So then it was sparing, yes. It can be converted. It's not readily accessible as a glucose, so it can be converted into a fuel, but it can be if we're lacking a certain amount of carbohydrates. So your body can break it down. It's just a slower process. It's not great for the power athlete who needs regenerative ATP very, very fast. So the carbohydrates there are fast. And that's why you see a lot of powerlifters trying to eat like candy. I don't love the candy during the workout so much, or during meets, because they crash. During a workout, it's an hour long, hour and a half long. That's fine. You don't have to worry about crashing. In a meet, when people are eating candy between squat attempts, they're always flat and dead by deadlifts because they've crashed. Their blood sugar has crashed down. They can't come back up.
What is the reason for this?
It's just they're spiking their blood sugar too fast, too high. They don't need to. You've only done 3 reps, 3 working reps. You don't need that type of carbohydrate in your system that's rapidly going up there and then causing your blood sugar to crash back down. If you want to have candy, save it for deadlifts, or just don't have fucking candy at all. You're a grown up. You can go through one day without candy.
Or eat peanut butter with it.
Yeah,
Slow it down.
I do that. I eat peanut butter. So people always ask me about that because you shouldn't have fats on meat day. I'm like, no, you shouldn't have an abundance of solid fats on meat day because it's hard for your body to break down. So if you're having a fatty chicken wing, but I'll eat a small amount of peanut butter on bread or crackers, especially Ritz crackers with lots of sodium, because it keeps my blood sugar stable. And I just have that with oranges or apples. So I have fructose, which is slow digesting, mixed a little bit of fats in there. I don't really worry about my protein on meat day too much. There's a small amount in my breakfast and a small amount in my grazing throughout the day of the peanut butter and crackers and fruit, because that's going to keep my blood sugar stable, keep me sustained, and then I'll have a big protein meal after the meat is done. The reason why I don't like a high protein meal during meat is because it's hard for my body to break down. And if my body's shuttling energy to my stomach to break down that dense protein, it's less energy I have to do the lift.
Yeah, so, it also has to be something that's easy to eat,
right?
That you're going to remember.
Most of what you're lifting off of is what you ate the day before. So eat well the day before, hydrate well the morning of, and then just carry yourself through with small meals and grazing. Enough not to be hungry, not enough to be full. I made that mistake too, where I didn't actually prepare food and I just ate protein bars. And the bloating was so excessive, I couldn't get my belt on the deadlift. And in my own way for my deadlifts, and I only got my opener. It was really bad. That was Raw Unity 7.
With your clients and even with yourself, as they become higher ranked, that'd probably be a good way to define that. As they become higher ranked, do you see an inverse relationship with volume?
Lower. It's a blanket statement for me to say they have lower volume over that time. But as a client tends to get stronger, there's no longer a need for me to push the volume aspect so much, except for post-meet when I want to rebuild their work capacity. Other than that, I'll taper their volume down. They're not going to need as much volume because they're so strong. You're not going to give somebody who squats 800 pounds, 5 working sets at 650 and 700 for a long period of time. You're going to break it down. So maybe I'll give them 1 or 2 weeks of higher volume and trickle the volume down as the loads keep going higher, but I'm not going to have sustained volume. A newer lifter, a younger lifter who needs to grow, they're going to have much more sustained volume other than deloads because they need to get bigger and they need to grow. The more advanced lifter, as they get stronger, the volume's going to come down because they don't need that volume stimulus as much as they need the load stimulus and the skill set practice. So I like to use a lot of inverted volume schemes with higher level lifters who are technically sound and efficient because they're going to create that motor unit recruitment without pushing that threshold of failure.
How is that when you go to explain that to them? Because then their default's going to be, well, this is what worked for me before.
And before you squatted 400 pounds, and now you squat 500 pounds.
I know.
And if you want to keep getting, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always gotten. And it's going to get to a point where that no longer progresses you. You need a different stimulus.
Yeah.
So we need load, we need volume, but we also do need novelty. That's where Conjugate goes very well with a lot of programs. There's a lot of novelty, so you're getting some type of stimulus. I hate when people call it muscle confusion.
Yeah.
That's dumb. But there's some novelty that keeps your system to wanting to adapt and grow because you're never used to the same stimulus, because we do adapt within 2 to 3 weeks of it. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing the same thing year in and year out over and over again, you're going to get to a point where the adaptation process slows, or the mental burnout happens because nothing ever changes. Nothing is exciting you. So that block after a meet for a lot of people, I like to put in weird shit like box jumps or yoke or farmer's carries if they have access to it. They're not really building anything with those. It's just giving them something fun to do, something different, or maybe more bodybuilding accessories instead of barbell work just for a while so they can work on their work capacity, then put the barbell volume back in there if they need it. But some level of novelty keeps you progressing and keeps you interested.
What about the difference between those that are using PEDs and those that are not?
There's not a tremendous amount of difference other than the fact that the person who's using PEDs is going to get away with a shittier lifestyle because he has artificial recovery. I don't want to encourage that.
No,
I don't want to be like, dude, you party, so you probably want to add some test.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they get away with more. The natural lifter, the true natural lifter, has to be so much more on point because they have less advantages as far as recovery. Mm-hmm. And that's where you really have to monitor recovery and volume, and frequency tends to go very, very well with the natural lifter because I don't want to say they're not as strong because there's many natural lifters, tested lifters who are incredibly strong, but they're not going to handle the same amount of volume and intensity that an enhanced lifter could for long periods of time. So maybe the natural athlete, you're maybe deloading a little bit more frequently. Instead of every 5 weeks, you're deloading every 4th week. Or maybe you have them doing, if you're having them doing high frequency, as much as people like to shit on Conjugate, maybe that's what you need to have them doing. Not necessarily a speed day, but heavy day, technique day, and technique day is lighter. Just with full intention, but lighter. Something that's not bringing them close to failure or fatigue.
I've always had this weird, I'll just call it ignorant theory that from what I've seen, the lifters that are on PEDs can express compensatory acceleration to a higher degree than those that are not, right? So, and you can see the difference between when they cycle on and when they cycle off.
Yes, absolutely.
Just especially on a box squat, for instance, you can see, you know, somebody just looks like they're thumping the bar. Like it's like what, you know, when they come off compared to just like a grind.
Is it the ability to activate more motor units, or is it just more of an aggression that comes with it?
I don't know. You see what I'm saying?
Oftentimes, I think it's just the aggression that comes with the compound.
That's why I said ignorant theory,
Yeah.
right? Because I see it, but when that's the case, and say it, then their ability to do more reps drops.
Right.
Their ability to build fatigue significantly increases because now it's, you know, everything's being hit harder and harder and harder. Where when it's compounded, what it actually ends up looking like is the person on PEDs has to do less work than the person that's not. And then I've always got pushback for that because no, that doesn't make sense, you know. And I'm like, well, because they should be able to recover from more. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like if they're on the PEDs, they should be able to do more work to be able to recover from more. And I'm like, I don't see that, but I don't know why. But most people that I know see the same thing, but nobody really knows why.
The cause and correlation.
Yeah.
You know? I think what happens is the person who's on PEDs is going to build muscle at a faster rate than the person who's not. And that muscle is adding to potential strength. And then you add in the aggression of the compound, and they're just moving it more intently, more fast, you know, more explosively because they can, and it feels good to do so. They're expressing their aggression, but they're adding muscle at a faster rate. So yeah, they can handle more work, but they're also adding muscle, which is what's progressing them faster.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, have you seen kind of the same thing?
Oh,
though?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I felt the same thing. You know?
Well, I know. I mean, I got firsthand experience here too. It's like, holy shit, it's back. Because it goes away, you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, training sucks for like 6 weeks, then you're back on in like 3 weeks later, like training feels good again.
Yeah, like this feels like shit out of the bottom. Like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah.
And it's, oh, thank God. And you're like, my shit kicked in. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. But
You're on, you're like, I love this. And you're off, you're like, why do I love this?
yeah, I know. But the whole time though, man, it's like a mind fuck because, you know, in your head, you're like, it doesn't work like this.
No, it is psychological to a degree.
Yeah.
There's another study where I think Greg Knuckles talked about it when he was on your podcast, where the placebo group was given placebo steroids, but told they were on steroids, and they exceeded beyond the steroid group. The power of belief is undeniable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you fuck with your own head?
Yes. Just gonna change all the labels on your bottles. I'll change them all and just put trend on all of them.
Oh God, no! Fuck no! Go with something else. You know, because that's gonna create a bunch of assholes.
We're already assholes.
Yeah, I get it.
It doesn't change the person; it just brings out what they are.
Yeah. Is there were there any topics that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up, or any questions that people threw out? Because I think you put something on your story, didn't you?
The only thing I mentioned on my story was the launch of a new website, because coaching and individual coaching is obviously a higher price point and more expensive, and we've brought up the importance of nutrition. So I'm launching a new website. There's a sign-up form on there. It's supposed to launch, if everything's on track, the second week of January, and it'll be offering nutrition services and like assisted coaching. So it'll have programming for them that is adaptable to them and individualized for them. But it also has, I'm building an entire exercise index. So they'll actually see me performing the exercise and how I want them. And most people will show you like a 10-second YouTube clip of someone squatting up and down. And it's more of like, you know, I'm doing prone simmers and here's what we're looking for and here's why, and be careful you're doing this. So they're more like 30 to 45-second clips explaining the movement in detail so they know what the faults lie and what I'm actually looking for. So it's like an assisted coaching model. So they'll have the programming. So obviously that'll cost less than individual coaching. And that way they'll have updated weekly programming or bi-weekly programming that has adapted to them, what they need. And the nutrition aspect on there will be as well. So I have a team that will formulate nutrition aspects for them, their macros, grocery list, shopping list, food, because like we've talked about, that's the biggest thing you could be doing to improve yourself is eating, hydrating, and sleeping better. Any program will help you to a degree, but the more details around that program you do to make yourself better, the faster you'll progress and the longer you'll stay there. It's very easy. I'm sorry, a lot of people get mad at this. It's very easy to get strong. It's really hard to stay there.
No, why do they get mad about that for?
Just because you're like, oh, it's not that easy to get strong. It's like, well, it is. If you eat right, sleep right, drink right, and train right, it's really easy to get stronger. But most people are like, well, it's like, no, the pushback isn't that it's hard to get strong. The pushback is it's hard for you to want to do those things.
No, it's a lot easier to point. Then it's going to get a little harder. And this is one of the pushbacks that I kind of had on, and I think everybody would agree with this, that when I don't like when people will go on PDs too soon because they don't learn how to overcome these sticking points and how to have to dial everything else in. You know, so a lot of people now, it's crazy. they'll train for 6 months and go on shit.
I get that question often.
Yeah.
I already had an international elite total before I went on. Like when I hurt my back, I was training for a USAPL meet.
Yeah.
I had an international elite total at 181 before I went on. I didn't go on, and I went on TRT when I was 34. I actually got my blood work tested, and I was like 360, something like that, like below the 400, barely, but enough that they're like, here's prescription testosterone, and this is what you'll take. And that was the switch training. Like once I start that, I can't go back. But
Yeah.
I was 34 and already had an international elite total because I've been lifting for so many years. I was competing at strongman naturally. I was competing in weightlifting naturally. And it was after the fact that I went on, and people were like, yeah, I've been doing this for years, so it's time for me to hop on. It's like, no.
But you learned how to overcome plateaus.
Yeah.
Where that's where I'm getting at is at some point they're still going to have to learn how to overcome plateaus. So you may as well learn how to overcome them when they first come.
Yeah.
Like right after
it doesn't
beginner
get
gains.
easier. It just gets more frustrating. So you better learn that skill up front.
Yeah. And if you hurdle jump that from the very beginning, it gets way harder.
Sure, because
when you
give a very famous presentation where you're like, that's your ace card, and you only have that ace card to throw one time.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a huge component. But now with the site that you're talking about is so the nutrition and that's in there, the exercise index is in there. Is there a community aspect to that?
There'll be a Facebook page where people can post and get community help and aspect. Absolutely.
Okay. And then how else can people find you?
My Instagram is @JaffeStrength. The website will be @JaffeStrength. I'm on Facebook, Trevor Jaffe, although I don't use Facebook very often or at all if I can help it, but I'm on there.
So Instagram is probably the best place.
It's the easiest way to communicate to me. Anyone who wants to inquire about actual individual coaching, they just email me, which is trevorjaffe@gmail.com. Like I simplify everything to the D as far as I can down, because the more simplified your process, the easier it is to go through it.
Okay. I want to thank you for coming out.
Of course, I loved it.
You know, for the guys everybody that's listening here, the next podcast will be January 8th. Next week, we won't have a podcast, but I appreciate all you guys for everything that you've done for the podcast for the year. And I actually almost had a closing, right? Because normally I just say we're done. So we're done. I almost had a closing, but we're done.